Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where prayers are whispered in candlelight secrets, steep in rosewater, and ink flows not from wells but from memory. You are a nun, not the stern kind with rulers and silence, but one with a quiet rebellion stitched into your soul. You wake up in your stone cell, the morning air barely warmed by the first hints of sunlight slipping through the narrow window slits. Everything smells faintly of stone candle wax and rosewater. That last one, entirely your fault. See, you're not supposed to be writing, not like this. Not with flower-scented ink made from petals you weren't supposed to pick. And yet, here you are beneath your cot, wrapped in cloth like a relic is your secret manuscript. Its pages flutter when you breathe too hard. Each word you've written was traced with care, dipped in a mixture of rosewater and soot, crafted in stolen twilight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stretch your arms, bones cracking in the hush of the cell. The bell hasn't rung for lauds yet. A few extra minutes. The air is cool and your fingers still faintly stained pink from last night's writing itch with the desire to write again. But the bottle is empty. You used the last of the rosewater yesterday, its scent now lingering more in memory than on parchment. You remember how it started. The first time you dared to write, you used soot mixed with spit and scratched it on old fabric. It smelled awful, looked worse. But then one evening, a novice spilled rosewater in the refectory. The scent was so heady, so clean, so other you couldn't resist. That night, you mixed rosewater with ash and tried again. The script turned glossy and smelled divine. Literal scented scripture. And you knew right then you'd never go back to ink. Outside footsteps echo sandaled, slow, not yet urgent. Probably Sister Thomasina making her rounds. She always hums that same off-key lullaby from her homeland. You wonder if even she has secrets tucked beneath her habit. You suspect most of the sisters do. A convent isn't a vault, it's a vessel. And you, dear Rose Scribe, are overflowing. You hide the manuscript again, careful to not disturb the loose floor tile. The weight of it comforts you like a hidden heartbeat. You think of how different your pages are from the convent's authorized scripts. Those are stiff, mechanical. Yours meander like scented breezes through a garden of half-forbidden dreams. You've written about saints, sure, but saints with laughter and longing, not just martyrdom. Saints who garden barefoot saints who doubt and then sing anyway. Historians still argue whether nuns in this period had true creative freedom. Technically, many copied texts, preserved languages, even translated Latin into the vernacular. But no one's really sure how much of themselves they slipped between the lines. You're sure, because you are one of them, and your words glossed in petal oil are utterly yours. Just last week you smuggled a fragment of your writing into the psalter Sister Magdalene was binding. A tiny poem folded between folios. She found it. You know because she left you half a clove and a smile at breakfast the next day. That's how things work here. Not confessions, but offerings. Not accusations, but winks. A quiet sisterhood of silent rebellion. Quirky detail you've even taken to scenting your quill. You dip the wood in lavender oil so your hand smells sweet while you write. Ridiculous. Unnecessary. But in this place where austerity is virtue, even a whiff of pleasure feels like an uprising. You once overheard a visiting priest say nuns should be vessels of silence? You almost laughed. If only he could smell your pillow. The sun starts to rise barely. A streak of light turns the cold flagstone pink. Rose-colored almost. Fitting. You know that once the day begins, your time is not your own. You'll chant clean weed, the garden stitch someone's torn robe, and copy another psalm you've already memorized twice over. But in this suspended moment before duty, before sound, you breathe in your little rebellion. It smells like ink petals, soot, and longing. And it smells like you. The day you took your veil, the wind was full of orchard petals. They swirled like confetti, though no one would have dared call it a celebration aloud. It was a solemn day, technically the death of your old life, the birth of your devotion. And yet nature seemed to disobey the rules. White blossoms from the apple trees fell like snow over the courtyard, clinging to the hems of your new black robe. You remember one landing right on the tip of your nose. You sneezed unceremoniously, and one of the older nuns hissed at you to show more reverence. You tried not to giggle, Ed, but it was all so absurd, wasn't it? You, the daughter of a perfumer trained to layer scent like a courtier, layer secrets now swearing obedience and chastity under a sky that smelled like honeyed wind. There had been no moment of clarity, no divine voice whispering from a burning fig tree. Just absence. The kind that grows after you've lost too much. Your mother's passing had quieted the world. Your father's grief had turned to silence. The house grew dimmer each week, and eventually someone said you'd be safer, better off, holier, even behind convent walls. You nodded because no one was really asking. That morning you had wanted to turn back. Even as the veil was lowered over your head, even as the prayers rang around you, your fingers twitched for something, anything that felt like yours. A pen? A vial of rose oil? A window with no lattice? But vows once spoken stick like wax. And yours had been whispered so softly that even you could pretend you hadn't meant them. You hadn't cried until nightfall. It was Sister Agnes who found you. She was old and sharp-eyed, the kind who could hear a lie from 3 pews away. She didn't speak. She just sat beside you, holding out a small square of linen. On it was a faint script, a quote from one of the mystics written not in ink, but something reddish and floral smelling. Love is the wound through which light enters. You touch the cloth. What is this? She shrugged. You'll find your own ink soon enough. Historians still debate whether women in cloistered orders had access to mystic writings like those of Hildegard or Hadovich. Some say only male confessors filtered those works down in safe fragments. Others argue there were entire secret scriptoriums of female interpretation hidden away in side chapels and garden cellars. You know where you stand on that. The linen stayed hidden in your pillow for months. You sniffed it like a child clinging to some imagined freedom. And then one night you tried to copy the phrase. Not with ink, which you weren't yet trusted with, but with crushed rose hips and the charcoal tip of a cooking stick. The result was messy, but aromatic. You had written your first line in Rosewater. It wasn't an act of rebellion then. It was yearning, pure and unpracticed. And so your relationship with the veil became more complicated than the sisters preferred. You wore it, yes. You bowed when expected, sang the prayers, pressed your forehead to the cold stone floor. But inside you bloomed a quiet orchard of words petaled, perfumed, unruly. Some nights you'd sneak into the cloister garden when the bells had long gone silent. You'd lie on your back in the grass veil tucked under your head and watch the moon play hide-and-seek with the clouds. You started bringing scraps of cloth petals, bits of charcoal. You wrote dreams. Or maybe they were memories. Or perhaps they were simply wishes dressed up in the rhythm of Latin. Quirky fact: you once tried to write a line of verse using crushed violets and vinegar. The color was stunning, the smell less so. Sister Marilla spent 3 days blaming the kitchen scullions for rotting pickles in the walls. That's when you realized your writing would have to be invisible to most. Not hidden exactly, but woven so softly into the daily rhythms that it wouldn't raise alarms. A note folded into laundry, a stanza scrawled on the inside of a chapel kneeler easily wiped away. A phrase traced into dust on the windowsill vanished with the first breeze. Because even though no one had explicitly forbidden it, you knew instinctively joy in this place must always be cloaked in solemnity. Creativity, if not sanctioned, becomes suspicion. Still, you kept writing, and the veil you began to see it differently. Not as a prison, but as camouflage. A soft, dark fabric beneath which you could ferment your little revolution. As long as you chanted on time and your stitching stayed straight, no one looked too closely at the ink stains on your fingertips. Not yet, anyway. Now, lying in your cell years later, you run your hand across the soft grain of the wood beside your bed. You can almost feel the exact groove where you first scratched a line of poetry using the bone of a chicken wing from supper. Even now, it smells faintly floral. You smile to yourself. The orchard wind never really left. It followed you in. And with every breath you take, it still stirs. The scent of myrrh clung to your childhood, though not from incense, but from soap. Your father used to make it himself, pounding resins in a marble bowl that now sits cracked and forgotten in your memory. He believed every scent had a soul and that perfumers were simply priests of the invisible. That's what your house had been, a temple of aromas. The front parlor was always filled with glass bottles, amber green, smoky blue, each sealed with wax and labeled in your father's careful looping script. You learned to read by those labels: cedar, civet, rose absolute. And you learned patience by watching your mother mix oils her fingers stained gold from saffron. Her breath always held as if she were balancing the scent of a kingdom. They never forced you to become like them. But you were always listening. And once your mother whispered something over your hair as she brushed it by lamplight, remember, little ink blot scent is the memory of the gods. You laughed at the time. You thought she was being poetic. But now you wonder, was she preparing you? Your home before the convent was filled with strange guests. One week it was a spice merchant from the Levant who carried black pepper as if it were treasure. The next, a wandering scholar who insisted he could smell a lie before it was spoken. You didn't doubt it. In that house, truth always had a fragrance. But the day everything soured was quiet. Your mother had gone to the river to wash saffron-stained cloth. She slipped, fell, or maybe her heart stopped first, no one truly knew. Your father sat for hours holding the cloth she left behind. He never cleaned it. He sealed it in a jar. And for weeks you could still smell her everywhere until one morning you couldn't. That absence hit harder than grief. It wasn't just her voice or her laughter you missed, it was the way the house had smelled like her. Everything faded. Your father stopped making perfume. Guests stopped arriving. You stopped laughing. And so when your aunt suggested the convent said it was safe, structured, holy, you agreed. What else was left? Your house no longer had a soul. Historians still argue whether young girls from artisan families had true agency when entering religious life. Some claim it was economic. Others say it offered rare literacy and freedom. But you remember your father's silence, your aunt's tight lips, and your own hand, writing your name at the bottom of the entry form, with fingers that smelled like dust. You didn't cry as the gates closed. You were too stunned. But you remember thinking, what do they smell like inside? That's what worried you most. Not God, not rules. But whether the air would be stale? It wasn't. Your first memory of the convent was soap goat's milk and dried lavender. Your cell had rough wooden floors, clean linens, and a single rose bush just beyond the window. You knew the sisters tended it. You wondered if any of them had loved perfume before prayers. One you would later discover had. Sister Joan, she was the laundry mistress, and her hands were always cracked but smelled faintly of frankincense. She saw you sniffing a basket of folded cloth one afternoon and said simply, "You come from a scented house, don't you?" You nodded, and she offered you a scrap of dried orange peel. It was nothing, really. A small kindness. But you slept with it under your pillow for months. That peel, shriveled and brown, outlasted your homesickness. Quirky story Sister Joan used to accidentally launder your tunic with rosemary. Claimed it was for vermin control. You pretended to believe her. It became your quiet game, the perfume of rebellion cloaked in utility. But you didn't write in those first months, not yet. Your hands were too busy with tasks, scrubbing, kneading, sewing, chanting. Your thoughts, however, wandered constantly. You began to rewrite psalms in your head, not out of heresy, but because you couldn't help imagining what David's songs might have smelled like. You imagined one sung beside a fig tree, another whispered in a cave thick with myrrh. The divine you thought must have had a scent. Your first secret poem was composed mentally while plucking lavender buds in the garden. You never wrote it down. You simply mouthed the lines to the rhythm of your breath, the way your mother used to recite prayers in the kitchen. It wasn't until months later, after you'd finally touched ink, that the verses spilled onto cloth like they'd been waiting. Still writing was dangerous, not forbidden outright, but discouraged unless supervised. The scriptorium was reserved for those deemed devout and dull. You were never dull. So you wrote in stolen moments, on scraps, on cloth, on the inside of your sleeve. Once in desperation on the back of your hand, using the juice from a berry you weren't supposed to eat. You began keeping the scraps in a tin that once held ointment, hid it behind a loose plank under your bed. You called it your altar of things unsaid. Some nights you'd light a candle and read your own words like psalms. A liturgy of longing? The sisters around you snored, whispered turned. But you inhaled ink and silence, and remembered who you used to be. The candle's glow dances on the cold stone wall, and the parchment before you remains stubbornly blank. It's not that you don't know what to write. Your mind swells with phrases, lines, verses that keep nudging the inside of your skull like trapped birds. But you have no ink. Not the real kind. Not the kind the scriptorium uses in heavy brass pots rationed out with ceremonial severity. You sigh and dip your brush, a crude one fashioned from broom bristles, and thread into the half-dried bowl beside you. The mixture is weak tonight, a slurry of soot and rainwater with a drop of rosewater scavenged from the infirmary. You hoped it would stretch one more page. It barely draws a line. The words fade as they dry the scent already slipping away. You remember what Sister Honoria said once in the refectory over pickled beets. The devil sits in the pause before a good line. You smiled into your bowl. If that were true, you thought your mind was practically hosting a demonic council. Tonight, the parchment taunts you. Blank as absolution. Wide as silence. You think of the old stories, those gilded manuscripts housed in distant cathedrals, pages so precious they were kissed before reading. The brothers who copied them wore gloves, lit only one candle, spoke no words. You You write by stolen fire with smudged fingers and the faint scent of decay on your sleeves. Historians still puzzle over the few surviving anonymous manuscripts that carry faint floral residue inked in shades not found in official palettes. Some believe they were love letters, others heresies. But a quiet camp argues they were devotional writings from cloistered women using the only tools they had. You like that theory. You hope somewhere in the future a scholar gently opens your pages and pauses not for the words, but for the way the parchment still smells faintly of roses. You touch the edge of the page, careful not to smudge the barely there line from earlier. You've gotten good at coaxing scent into ink even when color fails. Sometimes you've added oil of bay crushed clove, even a bit of honey to make it stick. The alchemy of writing here isn't about permanence, it's about ghosting yourself into something softer than memory. A quirky trick you once learned from Sister Eustelle: if you grind lemon rind into your mixture and hang the parchment near the fire, the words will only appear when warmed. Invisible ink. She called it holy mischief. You both laughed so hard you dropped the vial into the laundry pot. That tunic smelled like citrus and secrets for weeks. But tonight you don't have lemon. You barely have time. The bell for matins will ring soon. You have maybe 12 minutes. You close your eyes and murmur lines aloud instead. Your voice is hoarse with sleep. Still, the cadence comforts you. The words spill like prayer. Blessed is the silence where longing leans to listen. Blessed is the quill that bleeds what the tongue would swallow. Not bad. You'll write it tomorrow if the mix thickens. Your gaze drifts to the tile in the floor, the one with the loosened edge. Beneath it, wrapped in an old handkerchief printed with a faded pattern of vines, rests your hidden codex. Not quite a book yet, just sheets. Dozens now. Each one written in some variant of your rose ink formula, dried between layers of parchment, weighted by an old bone rosary. You unearth it slowly like it's breathing. You always feel guilty touching it. Not because of the content, though some pages do lean toward the ecstatic, but because of what it represents. It's the you that would not stay folded beneath the veil. And yet you are careful. Reverent. You don't read them all, just one. You unfold a page marked with a pressed marigold. The words are slanted, rushed from a night when you wrote while fevered. If I am your bride, let me smell of wild herbs, not incense. If I am your bride, do not hide me behind a curtain. Let me dance in the lit nave with the bees and the wind and the song of my own skin. You chuckle, then hush yourself. The phrasing is overripe, bordering on scandalous. You must have been delirious that night. Still, it feels true. Even now, something stirs in your belly when you read it. The parchment sighs as you fold it again. You kiss the edge not out of worship, but because no one else will. And you bury it back beneath the floor. The candle is almost out. You press the brush against your lip and taste ash. Your teeth ache. Your limbs ache. But it's the ache of having tried, and that's enough for tonight. Quirky detail. The convent once had a writing contest for St. Eulalia's Day sponsored by a bishop's niece. The prize was 3 apples and a bolt of blue fabric. You weren't allowed to enter. Too clever, said the abbess with a wink. That night you wrote a biting sonnet about women being silenced, rolled it into a scroll and left it under her pillow. She never mentioned it. But at supper the next day she served apples. A sound in the hallway, someone shifting. You blow out the candle. The darkness descends like a blanket, familiar and full. You breathe in the air thick with soot and the fading hint of rose. Tomorrow you'll try again. The herb garden is where secrets go to stretch their legs. You always arrive just before sext when the sun slices across the basil in gold-edged shadows, and the rosemary stands tall like a battalion of sleepy soldiers. There's something about this space so small and so pungent that makes you feel less contained. Maybe it's the chaos of scent. Maybe it's that the plants, unlike the sisters, do not pretend to be quiet. Thyme babbles. Marjoram sulks. And Rose, oh Rose, she's the flirt of the bunch, offering her fragrance like a wink across the cloister. It's here that your true ink begins to take form. No longer content with soot and rosewater alone, you start experimenting. You pluck petals and crush them between your fingers until they bleed a pink so faint it could pass for virtue. You dry mint leaves and grind them with candle soot to create a greenish smear that smells like absolution's breath. You keep your concoctions in repurposed vials, a former balm bottle here, a broken crucifix hollowed out and corked. You once tried to bottle chamomile and sage. The scent was divine, the color disappointing, the texture sludgy as penance. But that's a thing about invention, it doesn't care for rules, it only cares that you try again. Historians still debate whether cloister gardens were used solely for medicinal herbs, or if some were encouraged to grow fragrance for contemplative purposes. You think the truth is more human. If a woman tends a garden long enough, eventually she'll grow something, just for beauty. You write behind the hedgerow now. Not every day, but often enough that the soft patch of earth near the lavender bush bears the marks of your knees. There, with a flat stone as your desk and sunlight filtering through sage blossoms, you scribble psalms revised with your own heart. Your ink smells so sweet that bees once landed on your parchment and refused to leave. You didn't move, didn't breathe, just waited still as death while your words buzzed under tiny wings. A novice named Lisette spots you once. She doesn't speak. Just stands there holding a basket of yarrow, eyes wide and unreadable. The next day she brings you a sprig of mint tied with hair ribbon. No words. That's how it begins. You never speak of the writing, not aloud. But Lisette starts sitting near you at mealtimes. She asks questions with her eyebrows. You answer with soft shoulder nudges. She begins planting things outside the usual script: violet lemon balm, even a struggling pomegranate sapling. The other sisters scoff. Too exotic, says one. Not suitable for tinctures, but no one pulls them out. Quirky fact. You once convinced Lisette to distill rosewater using only a cracked oil lamp, an old teacup, and half a curtain. The result smelled like desperation. But you still used it. That week's pages carried an undertone of scorched linen, and the scent made your nose itch. You kept them anyway. There's a rhythm to your days now, chanting, kneeling, scribbling, sniffing. And in the garden, you begin to feel more like yourself than you have in years. You whisper to the thyme as you pick it. You apologize to the nettles before yanking their roots. You kiss the top of the rosemary shrub when no one is looking. One morning, while harvesting lavender, you write something new. Let no prayer go unscented, nor page pass untouched by wind. Let the hand that stirs the pot also stir the stars. Let the garden remember me. You fold it, press it into a beeswax tablet, and bury it under the calendula. A week later, it's gone. You don't panic. Some things are meant to vanish. Some things need to root. You begin dreaming in scents. One night, a nun from a century ago visits you in a dream, smelling of camphor and fennel. She tells you to write about the real saints, the tired ones, the doubtful ones, the ones who pick their noses during vigils. You wake up laughing. Then you write her a poem. You call her Saint Rue. patroness of women who didn't keep still. That day the garden feels especially alive. A cat you've never seen appears and sits beside your writing stone. It watches you with lazy green eyes, tail twitching as if it's judging your prose. You read a line aloud. The cat yawns. You whisper, "Everyone's a critic." It stays anyway, for weeks. You name it, Basilicus. Historians still argue whether cats were tolerated in convents. Some records suggest they were welcome for pest control. Others imply they were considered witches' companions. You figure the truth is the same as always. If something purrs and doesn't eat your ink, it earns a spot in the sun. You begin to sign your hidden verses not with your name, never that, but with a tiny paw print sketch. A curled tail, a lavender blossom, and beneath the garden the earth begins to hold your secrets. The convent had always taught you that alchemy belonged to men, those learned bearded ones in towers who turned lead to gold and wore ink stains like badges of logic. But down in the convent's quietest corners, with rose petals in one hand and soot in the other, you began crafting your own kind of alchemy. It didn't involve gold, only memory. You stirred ingredients with a spoon, whittled from pear wood, measuring by instinct rather than scale. Sometimes your mixtures bloomed in glorious, unexpected hues. Soft pinks with violet undertones or ochre with hints of resin. Other times they curdled into disappointment. The worst was the basil fiasco when you attempted to make a green ink from crushed basil leaves and vinegar. It smelled like a spoiled feast and stained your fingers for a week. Sister Aldith asked if you were hiding gangrene, but most nights you got it just right. The balance of flower ash and intention. Your room began to smell like an apothecary's dream, peppery floral with just enough bitterness to keep it grounded. The walls themselves began to remember absorbing faint traces of your experiments, so that even when you weren't writing, the air was sweet with unfinished poems. You started keeping records, not overtly, just small notes scrawled into the back pages of psalm books no one opened. You wrote things like rose plus fig ash, blush pink fades in 3 days, mint plus iron filings, bitter green waterproof but foul smelling, lavender plus soot, pladas was honey, sticky but heaven-scented. Historians still question whether nuns were engaged in early chemical experimentation or simply mimicking culinary processes. But you knew. You were reverse engineering memory itself, finding ways to bind scent to story. The scent, after all, was your signature. The abbess, oddly enough, never questioned you. Once she passed your open window and paused. "Something smells unruly," she said, sniffing the air. You looked up from your desk, bracing for rebuke. But she only smiled faintly. "Keep it from the bishop, won't you?" And that was it. Permission veiled in mischief. After that, you felt bolder. You began combining the alchemy of scent with the art of symbol. Not just words, but designs. A looped S to indicate sorrow. A triple dot motif to mean longing. You scattered these throughout your writings, forming a code that only your hands and nose could decipher. If someone else were to read your pages, they might think them poetic. Only you knew that a half-moon sketched in crushed lavender ink meant this was the night I thought I'd run. You started layering meanings. A poem about St. Lucy with words arranged like a winding vine. A verse shaped like a dove, written entirely in time oil ink. The parchment warped slightly under the weight of oil, but you didn't mind. It made the pages feel alive. Breathing. One night you tried combining ink and fire. Just to flicker a scrap of verse painted in elderberry, then held near the flame. The color deepened to indigo, the lines curling like whispers. You nearly burned your sleeve. You also nearly cried from joy. You weren't writing anymore. You were composing like the great scribes. No, like the forgotten ones. The ones who hid their names behind initials and let the scent speak for them. You remember a particular experiment with crushed violets and candle ash. The ink was watery, but the scent... Oh, the scent lingered for days. You dipped a reed pen into the mix and wrote, "Some saints are canonized for bleeding, others for how they made silence smell like safety." You tucked that page beneath your pillow and slept with your fingers still ink-stained. Quirky tidbit. You once left a love poem written in bay oil under the seat cushion in the chapel. You forgot it entirely until weeks later when Sister Julianne sat down during Vespers and shot up declaring, "It smells like soup and sin." You nearly choked on your chant. Lisette, seated beside you, covered her mouth. You saw the laughter blooming in her eyes like ink in water. The two of you grew closer not through words but through scent. She began to accidentally spill her wash basins near the compost heap, giving you access to charcoal. She tucked pressed flower petals into your sleeves. You left her pages curled into the prayer scrolls she copied. It wasn't romance, not quite, but it was intimacy. A kind of devotion. You began calling her silently my basilica, a sacred place in your mind. Historians still argue about the nature of female companionship in medieval convents. Some write it off as sisterly affection. Others lean toward deeper bonds cloaked in the language of Scripture. You don't need to choose. You live the answer whether or not the world finds the words for it. And one night in your ink making, you found the perfect mix. A ratio of rosewater, violet ash, and a single drop of beeswax oil. It clung to parchment like a prayer. It glowed faintly when the candle flickered. You called it ink of memory. You used it sparingly only for verses that felt holy in a way Scripture forgot how to be. Verses like, "If I am ever remembered, let it be by scent," not name, not title, but the hush after roses fade. There's a tile behind the altar that no one notices, not chipped, not loose, not marked in any obvious way. But you know it's different. You discovered it by accident one evening while dusting the reliquary. A breeze had slipped through the old iron grates and nudged the corner of the prayer cloth. As you reached to adjust it, your elbow knocked the censer stand ever so slightly, and there behind the embroidered drape, your hand brushed a tile that clicked. It was subtle. The kind of click that only someone who listens for secrets would hear. You waited until nightfall, after Compline. After the torches were doused and the sisters had shuffled back to their cells like old ghosts seeking rest, you tiptoed into the chapel barefoot, the flagstones cool beneath your feet, your breath shallow with anticipation and guilt. Your fingers found the tile again. Gently, you pressed it inward. There was a whisper, a shift, and then the corner lifted. Beneath it was a hollow space no bigger than a bread box lined with dust and time. You stared. Not because of what was there, but because of what wasn't. It was empty, utterly, as if it had been waiting just for you. And so it became the hiding place, the vault of your inked rebellion. Each night you added another page. Fold it gently wrapped in fabric infused with lavender oil so the scent would mask any trace of mold or ink. Some were psalms rewritten with a woman's voice. Others were dreams shaped into sonnets. A few were just questions written over and over like a child trying to memorize the shape of doubt. Where does the soul hide when the mouth must stay silent? Is God moved by perfume? Does longing count as prayer? Historians still debate whether hidden texts found in cloisters were acts of protest or simple private reflection. Some pages bore verses in feminine Latin, odd dialects, local idioms. A few were overtly political critiques of bishops, of kings, even of papal excess. But many were quiet, fragrant, personal, your own. You weren't writing to change the church. You were writing to survive inside it. Sometimes when you couldn't sleep, you'd tiptoe to the chapel and sit in the back pew, just to be near the floor where your words slept. You imagined them shifting softly beneath the stone, breathing with the earth, stretching like pressed flowers forgotten in a book. The chapel was cold, but your pages kept you warm. Quirky detail. You once pressed a sliver of candied orange peel between two pages, hoping the scent would remain for decades. When you checked it a week later, a trail of ants had found it first. You spent an hour sweeping them up, whispering apologies with every brushstroke. Lisette never asked what you did after hours. But one night she left a small piece of parchment under your pillow. It smelled of clove and salt. On it, in her awkward hand, she had written, "If your words vanish, I will remember them." You didn't cry, but you touched the page to your cheek before hiding it in the tile box. Over time, the manuscript grew thick, heavier than sin, lighter than breath. You stitched the pages together loosely, binding them with hair threads and hope. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't meant to be. It was yours. You began to worry someone might find it. Not the abbess, she would only sigh. But the bishop's clerk, or worse, one of the external confessors who came sniffing for heresy. They'd seize it, burn it. Call it vanity, call it worse. So you disguised it. You stitched a false cover from scraps of discarded vellum and labeled it Prayer Index Volume 7. No one ever touches Volume 7, and just in case you added 2 pages of actual indexes. One for Psalms, one for Saints' feast days. Dry, unreadable. The kind of thing even the most devout scholar would flip past in boredom. The rest you filled with soul. You once wrote, "In this house of vows and vinegar, I keep a library no one sees." It smells like petals pressed in parchment, like longing that forgot how to kneel. You tuck that verse on the very first page, written in ink, made of crushed lavender, rosemary, and wine lees. The color shifted from gray to plum as it dried. The scent lingered for weeks. You told no one. Except maybe the stars when you walked the cloister at night. The moon sometimes seemed to lean in curious. You offered her your hand, like a partner at a dance. She never turned you away. Historians still search for the authors of the Lavender Codex, a fragmentary manuscript found centuries later with rose-stained pages and scent still clinging to its edges. The script was unmistakably feminine, the ink still faintly fragrant. You wonder across time if someone's reading your words now. Nose dipped close to the page, smiling at the perfume of your defiance. If you are, then remember this. The nun who wrote in Rosewater did not ask permission. She just wrote. The convent is a place of habits, rituals looped, like embroidery stitched into every hour, every breath. So when something changes even slightly, it ripples through the cloister like a secret in a still pool. And lately the change is sent. Not all the time. Just enough. During morning prayers, a note of jasmine hovers above the usual must and wax. In the scriptorium, someone remarks that a pile of parchment smells faintly floral. No one accuses, not yet. But the questions begin to slink into the corners. You pretend not to notice. You chant with the others' eyes dutifully lowered. You press your lips to the psalter with solemn reverence, though your fingers itch to return to your hidden pages. One day, as you pass through the hallway toward the herb garden, you hear two sisters whispering. It's not perfume, one says. It's more like a prayer that's gone wandering. The other laughs. Maybe a saint spilled her tea. You smile under your veil, because the truth is you have gone wandering. Not from faith, but toward it sideways, crooked like a root, searching for water. But it's not just you who's begun to notice. There's a change in the air, and the sisters are catching it. One morning you leave a page tucked into the missal on the choir lectern. It's a single line written in rose and ash ink. God speaks best in scent and silence. You do it for no reason, or maybe for every reason. And someone replies. The next day, scrawled in the margin of Psalm 42, someone has written, Then I have heard God many times, for I have wept while baking. You stare at it so long during lauds that Sister Aldith nudges you. Are you having a vision or just bored, both you whisper? She doesn't laugh, but she doesn't report you either. Quirky tidbit. A century ago, a group of Benedictine nuns in Germany reportedly infused every manuscript page with crushed marigold oil to keep moths away. Their texts still carry the faint scent. The abbey insists it was accidental. You don't believe them. No woman spends that much time with flowers without intention. More and more, the other sisters begin sniffing curiously. Sister Honoria starts burning rosemary near the dormitories. To clear the air, she says. But you know the scent she's chasing isn't from rot or mold. She's hunting something older, more tender, something with petals. The set finds you in the garden one afternoon, holding a half-finished page to the sun to dry. You freeze, heart-thudding. But she only leans in, breathes in, and says it's beautiful, even when you haven't finished saying it. You want to hug her. Instead, you hand her the page. Keep it, you say. It's the only one I didn't write with a box. She tucks it into her robe. The next day, you find a sprig of thyme on your pillow. A note for courage that doesn't look like shouting. Historians still argue whether nuns communicated with each other through coded flowers and scented artifacts. Some claim it's a romanticized notion projecting modern sentiment onto cloistered discipline. Others cite convent inventories listing rose petals, saffron, and lavender stored in unexpected quantities. They question, but they never quite prove. That's the thing about scent. It vanishes before you can capture it. But its memory lingers like a haunting. You begin writing less in words and more in gesture. A page pinned to a wall with a bit of lavender ribbon. A scroll tucked into the folds of a novice's veil. A single line. Let no woman forget the taste of joy written in violet ink beneath the communion wafers. The abbess finds one. You're sure of it. One evening after supper, she pauses at your bench, says nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, when I was young, I wrote love songs. Before I knew they were love songs. You dare not breathe. She adds, I burned them before my vows. But sometimes I think the smoke still clings to me. Then she walks away. You sit frozen, unsure whether you've been blessed or warned. That night, you press your pages with extra care. Wrap them in layers. Add a sachet of dried rose hips. You consider writing something to the abbess, something to say, I see you too. But you don't, not yet. There's a comfort in restraint, a kind of sacred withholding. But the box beneath the chapel grows full. You feel it when you lift the tile, the weight now tugging like a hidden organ. It has mass memory, maybe even momentum. And still you write. You write about saints who smelled of bread and earth. About women who kissed pages before folding them into their sleeves. About faith that isn't loud but lingers like the scent of crushed herbs on warm skin. And you begin to wonder, what if the future never finds your name but does find your scent? Would that be enough? You think maybe yes. Because while names vanish in ink and time scent lives in breath, and breath lives on. They say a convent is a place without letters. No mail, no outside gossip, no ink that isn't strictly supervised. But you write letters anyway. Letters that don't exist. Letters no one will read. And especially letters to the dead. You started with your mother. The first one was simple. Just, are you somewhere with rosemary? You burned it in the herb garden, watching the paper curl and blacken until the wind lifted the ash like an answer too faint to understand. After that, it became a ritual. Not every day, but often enough that the routine started to comfort you. You'd gather scraps, cloth parchment ends, even the backs of old psalm pages. Anything that would hold ink. Then you'd dip your brush into whatever mix you had on hand, rosewater with soot, or elderberry steeped in candle oil, and write things you never dared speak aloud. I heard your laugh today in the sound of the bees. Do you remember the way saffron stained your sleeves? The abbess smelled like marjoram this morning. I think she's lonelier than she knows. You never signed them, never sealed them. You didn't need to. The scent was the signature. The fire, the delivery. One evening you wrote a letter to your father, not the man he became after grief, but the version you barely remember, before silence took root. You named me after a flower you said bloomed only in moonlight. What was it? You burned that one slowly, petal by petal, letting the words vanish like incense. Historians still argue whether burning written prayer was accepted practice or heretical extravagance. Some claim it was a form of purification, others a pagan echo. A few suggest that in certain communities, particularly among mystic-influenced orders, it was tolerated, especially if the smoke smelled like something sacred. You didn't care for their arguments. You knew what the fire meant. It was not destruction. It was release. Lisette found you mid-burning once. You'd lit a letter to your mother, folded tight and tucked with the pressed violet. She stood behind you in the shadows, quiet as always, watching the flames curl your grief into the wind. She'd be proud, she said. You didn't ask how she knew it was your mother, you just nodded. After that, the letters changed. They became more like conversations. You began to address people you never knew. Saints, lost poets, the nun whose name was half scratched off a crumbling wall tile near the scriptorium. You called her Sister Watchery. You wrote, "Did you ever want to leave? Did you ever stand at the garden wall and dream of tasting honey straight from the comb without blessing at first?" You burned that one too. Quirky detail. One time you wrote a letter to your future self. You sealed it in wax mixed with lavender and hid it in a crack behind the altar. You told yourself not to open it for 10 years. The next day it was gone. Either God has a sense of humor or someone else needed it more. There's a magic in writing what you're not supposed to. You start including poems with your letters. Short ones like the beginnings of songs that never got sung. She knelt by the rosemary bush, hands full of thorn and bloom. They told her silence was holy, so she sang in the language of perfume. The pages begin to glow faintly under candlelight, not because of any alchemy, but because your hands hold them like something sacred now. They're no longer just your rebellion. They're your memory, your prayer. One night after the fire has gone out and the ash has cooled into silence, you lie back in your cell and imagine your mother catching the scent across time. She's standing barefoot in your childhood garden, hair pinned up, holding a copper bowl of crushed petals. She lifts her head, sniffs the air, and says, "She's writing again, and you hope it's true." You begin to notice that your letters leave behind traces. Faint perfume on the stones, a smudge of ash in the crease of your robe, a curl of parchment found by the wind and carried off into the cloister. The other nuns never ask, but their prayers change. A little more tender, a little more scented. Someone begins humming during matins, a tune you once whispered to yourself while writing. Historians still hunt for evidence of nuns who wrote in secret. They look for initials marginalia, irregular ink, but they never think to follow the scent. You wonder if they'll ever realize that faith, when burned, gently smells like longing, and longing, when written softly enough, becomes its own kind of gospel. The abbess begins leaving things on your bed. It starts innocently, a cracked vial of standard scriptorium ink. Dull, chalky smells like iron and rain. You ignore it. Then a week later, a sheet of unused parchment appears folded with near monastic precision. Next, a sliver of sandalwood tucked beneath your pillow, wrapped in an old ribbon that smells distinctly of beeswax and patience. She never says a word. You never ask. This is how permission arrives in cloisters, not through declarations, but through gestures. Tiny, deniable, and warm as a cupped flame. You respond the only way you know how. One night you leave a note on the abbess's chair in the chapel. Just a line written in ink made from rosemary oil and soot. Even stone can carry scent if the hand is gentle enough. She never acknowledges it, but 3 days later the chapel candles are scented with bay. You smile and say nothing. The sisters begin noticing more. They lean in when you pass. Some sniff discreetly. One even mutters, "Someone smells like a festival," before hurriedly crossing herself. Lisette beams openly now. She ties herbs into her girdle ribbon. You think she might be composing verses in her head. You hope she is. The abbess never scolds. Instead, she becomes curious. Stays behind after compline now and then lingering in the chapel as if expecting someone to speak. Historians still debate the extent of convent leadership's tolerance for non-sanctioned creative expression. Some argue that minor transgressions were ignored so long as obedience and duty remained intact. Others believe silence from above was its own quiet rebellion. You now suspect the abbess had her own manuscript, once maybe hidden, maybe burned, but definitely once held tight. One night, after washing ink off your fingers with water steeped in thyme, you find a note tucked beneath your copy of the Rule of Saint Benedict. It reads, "I have loved in silence too." It is unsigned. The handwriting is slanted austere. The ink smells like nettle. You whisper thank you to no one. Or maybe to everyone. You start writing again with new purpose, not just to remember or to ache, but to witness. You begin transcribing lives of saints, but with edits. You keep the miracles, yes, but add in the sleeplessness, the doubt, the dry skin from kneeling too long. You write about St. Bridget's scent clover and milk. You describe St. Clare's voice as raspy from weeping too much. You keep your additions subtle, but the page becomes yours. Quirky bit. You begin adding minuscule drawings in the margins, tiny feet, birds, herbs. You hide a snail behind Psalm 119, a rosemary sprig beside the Beatitudes. Lisette finds one and starts leaving her own stars bees, once even a fish that looks suspiciously like the abbess. The scriptorium becomes a secret garden. The bishop visits. Word had reached him something about fragrant manuscripts, about unusually poetic translations. You are summoned to attend a formal reading in the chapter house. Your heart thunders. You nearly drop your psalter in the baptismal font. He's plump the bishop, cheerful, smells of damp wool and old incense. He scans the pages, squints, lifts a brow. This one smells like nutmeg, he asks. You freeze. Lisette blinks slowly. The abbess smiles. Ah, yes. A small gift from our herbalist. The parchment was stored near the kitchen stocks. You know how these things mingle. He nods satisfied. Makes the word more savory. You stifle a snort. The abbess gives you a warning glance, but there's amusement behind it. Historians still wonder how manuscripts survived ecclesiastical inspections. Theories abound. Co-conspirators in the clergy distracted bishops, nuns too clever by half. You now believe in all three. After the visit, things feel lighter. You're given access to a small, unused chamber off the scriptorium. No questions asked. Just a key on your cot. Inside there's a wooden desk, a single candle, and a window. Just large enough for the wind to whisper through. You move your codex there, carefully, reverently. And now every evening you sit and write in open secrecy. You light your lavender candle. You ink your words in a new formula, rosewater, cinnamon, a drop of your own blood, just once, just for the first page. You sign it, written in scent and silence. Let no one say we were not here. You begin titling your entries, not with headings, but with gestures. A petal folded in, a ribbon tied once for joy, twice for grief. A pressed herb for every emotion too large to name. You sleep easier, not because you're safe. Nothing in this life is ever entirely safe, but because you're seen. The abbess knows. Lisette knows. And you suspect even the walls are beginning to listen. Each night before you leave the room, you whisper to your manuscript. You are the part of me that kept blooming. You never meant to fall in love. Not with a person, not exactly, but with a memory. A moment. A glimmer of something you barely touched. It happened long before the veil, when your hair still smelled of almond oil and your hands weren't yet stiff from ink and rosary. He was a courtier, not important, not titled, just beautifully out of place. You saw him once in the market arguing with a vendor over a bruised fig. He held it like a lost gem, inspecting it with the care of a jeweler. Then he looked up and saw you staring and smiled. That was it. Nothing else. No poems, no letters. Just that look, brief and golden and too much. But you thought about it for months, and even now in the silence of the convent, the memory arrives sometimes when you're writing. You don't dream of him, not really. You dream of that pause, that electric breath before the smile, that feeling of being seen if only for a heartbeat. So you write to him. Not often, not seriously. But in the margins of your scented pages, you scribble things like, "You knew the worth of a fig. That's more than I can say for some saints." Or if you had followed me past the veil, would you have smelled the ink on my fingers? Would you have called it perfume or penance? Historians still argue whether cloistered women carried secular love into religious life. Some say it was purged through prayer. Others argue it lingered, sanctified, sublimated, but never entirely extinguished. You think it's simpler than that. The heart does not recognize walls. One evening during a rare thunderstorm, you sit with your codex by the window, candlelight dancing. The air smells of petrichor and beeswax. You begin a new page not to him, but inspired by him. Some loves are meant to go unnamed, carried like scent on wind, traceable only by those who breathe deeply. You don't cry, you smile. The ache has softened over time. It no longer bruises, only brushes. You imagine he's old now, maybe bald. maybe still debating over figs. You wish him well, and then as thunder rolls over the hills and the rain drums the roof like fingers on vellum, you write something new. Not to him, but to the feeling he left behind. I choose stillness over touch, ink over skin, but I do not forget. You tuck the page beneath a pressed violet. The flower has faded to gray, but its shape is intact, like memory itself altered but persistent. Quirky moment sister Honoria once found an old love poem wedged into the hymnal binding. It was smudged barely legible, but it ended with the phrase, "He called me his cinnamon miracle." She read it aloud to the novices with deadpan solemnity, then declared, "Let this be a cautionary tale." Everyone laughed for 5 minutes. You included. Lisette begins writing too. You find fragments in her sewing basket, verses stitched in white thread into scraps of blue cloth. They say things like, "Heaven feels closest when I stop pretending to deserve it." Or she wrote with her elbows on the table like a sinner, and I loved her for it. You don't ask if they're about you, but she gives you the cloth anyway. You begin keeping a book of not prayers. Verses too uncertain to chant. Questions too sharp for homilies. It lives in the scriptorium chamber, hidden under a false bottom in the desk. It smells like sandalwood and dried lavender. You write in it when you don't know what else to do. Tonight you add, "Blessed are the unsent letters, the burned poems, the glances exchanged across chasms. No vow can bridge." You run your fingers over the drying ink. It doesn't smear. It never smears when it matters. The rain softens. Thunder withdraws like a curtain being drawn. Historians will never find this page, but perhaps scent will carry it forward. Perhaps someone one day will hold a parchment that smells faintly of regret and rosemary and understand it without needing to read a word. Because love true, gentle, unrushed love rarely shouts. It lingers, like rosewater pressed into linen, waiting for a warm hand to stir it back to life. The scriptorium is off limits after dusk, officially, but official hours have always bent around your footsteps. You've become practiced in silence breath. Shallow sandals removed veil pinned tight to avoid brushing against wooden beams. The moonlight spills in through the narrow stained glass windows, bathing the room in fragments of blue and gold. The air is thick with the memory of ink and old prayers. You press the door open just enough to slip through. Inside the table sit like patient animals, long backs and cluttered flanks. Quills rest in pots, half-drunk cups of cooled herb tea left behind by scribes. The great book of hours lies open on the center table, illuminated with careful, righteous precision. You didn't come to admire it. You came for the damaged one. It rests beneath the stack of worn psalters, its cover cracked, its pages curled by the damp. A forgotten copy once meant for repair, now deemed too costly to fix. You pull it out like an orphan from a crowd. You lay it flat and lift the cover. It sighs. The manuscript is riddled with damage ink. Faded initials rubbed raw illuminations, smudged where hands once lingered too long. But you adore it. It's the only book in the convent that looks like it's felt things. You run your fingers over the margin. You wonder who wrote it. You wonder what they were feeling when they penned those slanted lines of Latin. Not just piety. Something more. There's a tilt in the letters, a rhythm of someone rushing perhaps before the bell or before doubt could catch them. You flip to a page with a blank margin and begin, not with scripture, with yourself. You draw a tiny sprig of sage, just the leaves. Then a line, "Faith is not a fortress. It is a garden with poor fencing and an open gate." Quirky tidbit. There's a superstition in some cloisters that if you write your truth in a holy book at midnight, it will never fade no matter how many hands try to erase it. You're not superstitious, but just in case you check the hour. Almost midnight. You smile. You flip forward. Add another line. My ink is scented because my silence was not. The moon tilts through the glass. You breathe in the smell of old vellum cracked spines, beeswax thyme oil. It smells like the past. Like honesty, like a voice finally exhaling. You think of the other nuns, those who came before you. Women whose names never made it to records. Whose scribbled notes were wiped clean. You imagine them looking over your shoulder now, not scolding, watching, perhaps even smiling. Historians still argue whether women scribed in secret or were permitted to touch holy texts under guidance. The answer is both. The record is patchy, but the margins are crowded with whispers. You add to the chorus. I do not rewrite the word. I breathe beside it. You flip to the front and carefully between the dedication lines write. This book was touched by a hand that smelled of rosemary and ink. That will fade. But not entirely. Not if the moonlight helps. Not if someone cares enough to press their nose to the page one day and wonder who was she. As you move to put the book back, you hear a creak. You freeze. Then a soft shuffle. A familiar one. Lisette appears in the doorway, her silhouette cut clean against the light from the corridor. I thought you might be here, she whispers. You hold your breath. Are you here to report me? She walks over slowly, then sits across from you, careful not to disturb the book. No, I'm here to listen. You turn the book toward her. She runs her fingers over the sage sprig you drew. Then she says, You write like you're remembering something that hasn't happened yet. You laugh, but it's a quiet sound, the kind that leaks out when you're not guarding your joy. You pass her the quill. Your turn. She hesitates, then dips the pen in your lavender thyme ink. On the back inside cover, she writes, Her words smelled like what I didn't know I missed. The candle between you trembles slightly. The silence isn't heavy now. It's thick with understanding. You both sit in the sacred quiet. The book between you, the ink drying slowly. When you finally part, you kiss the edge of the manuscript. Not as worship, as farewell. Historians may never know that one book of hours holds the whispered hopes of two cloistered women who wrote not to be seen but so that their scent might survive the centuries. He arrives smelling of horse's wool and sanctimony. The bishop. Once a year he visits your convent all rustling robes and booming Latin. His voice echoing in the vaulted chapel like thunder in a tin cup. The sisters line up like quills in an inkwell tidy silent blank. You, too, veil crisp. Eyes down. Fingers folded with just enough tension to hide the trembling. It's not fear exactly. It's the knowing that someone who does not understand the garden has come to measure the vines. He blesses the bread. He murmurs about humility. He thanks the abbess for her stewardship with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Then, inevitably, he asks to inspect the scriptorium. The abbess's face doesn't flicker. She nods once, and you feel the air in your chest tighten like parchment pulled too taut. You watch from a safe distance as he runs a gloved hand along the spines of books you know by scent alone. His nose wrinkles faintly. This one smells. He pauses. Floral A chuckle practiced. The sisters have begun preserving their inks with plant oils, the abbess replies. It keeps the pages from brittleness. He nods distracted. Lifts a manuscript. Not your manuscript, but close enough. You clench your fists. You count breaths. You recite a psalm in your head, replacing every second word with the herb name to calm yourself. Blessed thyme the marjoram, who walk mint the basil of lavender. He flips through the pages too quickly to see the subtle artistry. The loops. The hidden sprigs inked in rose-hip red. You half hope he'll notice. You more than half hope he won't. Eventually he sighs. Acceptable work. Though I caution against overfragrance. The word of God should not be perfumed like a bride. You look up startled, because perhaps that's exactly how it should be. The abbess simply inclines her head. Of course, Excellency. Historians still argue whether ecclesiastical inspectors understood the coded language of convent life. Some believe the men were oblivious. Others suggest they saw more than they let on, but tolerated small trespasses in exchange for peace and order. You suspect they knew just enough to keep their hands clean. After he leaves, the sisters exhale like wind through a canopy. Sister Aldith mutters, "If the word shouldn't smell like a bride, he's clearly never met a holy woman on a feast day." You smother your laugh in your sleeve. Later that evening, you creep back to the scriptorium just to check. Your manuscript is untouched, hidden well beneath the decoy volume marked Feast Day Penances Voleurs 4. You open it anyway. The scent is still there, lavender ink and the faintest trace of beeswax. Your heart begins to slow. Quirky aftermath. Lisette leaves a tiny bouquet in your scriptorium chamber the next morning. Thyme, rosemary, one stray calendula bloom. No note, none needed. You gather the herbs and lay them in your lap like a rosary. That evening you write again. They came smelling of horses. We answered with lavender. They spoke in rules. We replied in root and bloom. They weighed the ink. We breathed in the page. You pause. Let the ink settle. Then add, and when they left, the air was no longer theirs. You press the page with rosemary to set the scent. Outside, the chapel bell rings for none. You close your book, tuck it away, and walk through the cloister with your chin just a little higher. The bishop may bless the altar, but you bless the margins. The psalms are relentless. You've copied them so many times your fingers sometimes begin tracing the verses in your sleep. They're beautiful, yes, but also rigid, formed in a world of thunderous men where righteousness comes in the form of smiting and wrath. You crave softness, whispers, words that sound like water over stones, not swords against necks. So you begin to change the margins. Not the main text. Never the main text. That's sacred and violable. But the edges? Oh, the edges are yours. You start with small flourishes. A vine here, a trailing blossom there. Then birds. Bees. Once a tiny fox sleeping beneath the line, my soul rest in hope. You draw with your ink of scent, mixing your colors each morning like preparing a hymn. And then you begin to hide words inside the vines. Pet names for God. Lines of longing you dare not say aloud. Questions no confessor would entertain. Did Mary ever feel lonely in the garden while the men preached? Does the wind count as prayer if I sigh into it with intent? Historians still debate whether nuns used marginalia for mischief devotion or both. Some pages survive with rabbit swearing, bishops' mitres, saints with smudged halos, women winking from the corners of holy texts. You understand them completely. Margins are where the truth goes to stretch its legs. One day, while copying Psalm 63, you draw a bee mid-flight. Above the phrase, "My lips will glorify you," you make it delicate, almost invisible. But Sister Colette notices. She leans in, squints, then whispers, You've captured its wings. I swear they shimmer. You don't respond, but later that night a honeycomb appears beside your bowl at supper. No note, just sweetness. The abbess, of course, knows. She always does. But she says nothing. Instead, she starts leaving older manuscripts on your desk, ones with frayed edges and faint remnants of long faded flourishes. It's like she's offering you lineage. One of them bears the ghost of a rose drawn in red ink. Beneath it, Ora pro nobis soror. Pray for us, sister. You trace it with your finger, overcome with the sudden tenderness. Someone before you had the same hunger for beauty, for permission, for bloom, amid the bark of sacred law. You write back in the margin, she is not gone. She is pressed between the pages, waiting for scent to wake her. You begin writing not just to God or to the past, but to the book itself, to the parchment, to the animal skins that once lived and breathed, now smoothed flat and bound for eternity. You write you were once a sheep on a hillside. Now you are holy. Let me bless you with ink that smells of time. Quirky footnote. You accidentally ink a tiny worm in the corner of Psalm 109 just for fun. Lisette sees it and immediately draws a hawk in pursuit. The next day you add a cloak around the worm. It becomes a game, an epic unfolding page by page. By week's end, 3 sisters have contributed. The worm is now a scholar. The hawk has converted and become its apprentice. Sister Aldith adds a monastery cat glaring at both of them. The Psalms have never been more alive. Historians may never decode it. But that's the delight of it. You are speaking in a dialect of joy, of scent, of ink with intention. You wonder sometimes, what if God prefers the margins? What if the holy happens not in the thunderous verse, but in the doodle drawn between lines? Tonight you sit in your scriptorium chamber, candle flickering lavender sage ink in your pot. The parchment smells warm and soft like a garden asleep in early spring. You draw a swallow in the corner, underneath it in your smallest script. Yet if I ever vanish, follow the scent. I left a trail. It arrives as a gift, quiet, anonymous, and winged. A feather. Long, narrow, delicately curved. Left on your writing desk between evening vespers and supper. Dark at the tip, fading to a soft ivory near the quill. You recognize it instantly, a swallow's feather. Not from the henhouse where feathers are thick and clumsy. No, this one belonged to a bird that flew, that sang, that skimmed across the sky with joy in its bones. You lift it gently like a relic. It's still warm absurdly, as though the bird left it just for you. You've never had a proper quill of your own. The scriptorium hands them out sparingly, and only the dull ones shave to near uselessness. You've made do with sharpened sticks, bundles of bristles, even once a sliver of bone from a lamb roast, but this is different. You trim it slowly, reverently, whispering a prayer not found in any missal. Let this feather carry what my tongue cannot say. Let its flight not end at ink, but in breath. Let every curve be a wing bent toward remembering. You dip it in your softest ink, a blend of rosewater, soot, and honey steeped for a week under your cot. It takes to the feather as if it had been waiting for it. Your first stroke on the parchment glides like a sigh. That night you write without hesitation. You write a letter to no one in particular, or maybe to everyone. This quill once touched sky. So I borrow its memory. I press it to parchment like a kiss. Not to leave a mark, but to remind the page that we once flew. You don't burn this letter. You tuck it into the fold of your mattress close to your heart. You want to sleep beside it. You want to be reminded that you were given something beautiful, not because you earned it, but simply because someone saw that you needed it. Quirky discovery. The quill squeaks ever so slightly when you write with it. Not a screech, more like a chirp. You begin calling it your scriptening bird. Lisette hears the sound one morning and laughs into her tea. Even your tools want to sing, she says. You do not disagree. The feather transforms your handwriting. It loops softer curves with rhythm dances instead of plods. You begin tracing your older pages with a touch more grace, even adding miniature flourishes to verses long since finished. The pages start to feel like hymns you can touch. You draw a full swallow into the margin of Psalm 84, even the sparrow finds a home, and beneath it you write, "So did I." Historians still argue whether medieval quills were symbols of status or simply tools. There are records of monks receiving goose feathers from visiting bishops, and even one tale of a scribe refusing to write until he was given an owl feather for wisdom. You believe it's simpler than that. A pen is a blessing, a good one, a miracle. You begin writing earlier more often. The pages stack up like petals at your feet. Your ink-smeared apron becomes a badge of pride. The sisters begin referring to your chamber as the aviary, though no birds are kept within. Only feathers, only flight. And then on the third night, you find a second feather. This one even finer golden at the tip. No note. Just quiet affirmation. You press it into your book of not prayers and write beside it. Let no silence be so wide that a feather cannot cross it. The next week, another feather arrives. Pale gray, soft, and fraying at the edge. You begin suspecting a collaborator. Possibly two. One of them clearly has access to the laundry roof or swallow's nest. Another perhaps knows how often you sit by your window watching the sky instead of the crucifix. You don't mind the mystery. In fact, it feels sacred. There's something deeply holy in being given beauty anonymously, in being trusted with flight when you never asked. You write a poem to the bringer of feathers, "I will not name you, gift giver." You are the hush in the chapel after laughter. You are the shadow of wings on my veil. You are the reason this ink keeps singing. You draw a small wing in the corner of the page and scent it with clove and violet oil. It smells like dusk, like not knowing, like hope. And in the hush that follows your final stroke, the feather in your hand quivers just slightly in the breeze. It feels like a nod. You begin writing saints' lives, but not the ones from the approved list. Not the warriors or bishops, not the ones with shining halos and golden spines. You begin with the quiet ones, the forgotten, the almost heresies. Saint Meralda of the clay hands, who never spoke aloud but shaped psalms into pots. Saint Rhoetia, who smelled of marigold and mended the sandals of pilgrims too poor to kneel. Saint Orlando, who was canonized in only one village for the miracle of feeding starving birds all winter. You write them in scented ink. Soft brown lines drawn from bark oil and nutmeg, layered over lavender-stained parchment. You copy in the structure of the official Vitae birth, miracle martyrdom, but slip your own truths in the in-between spaces. Your favorite page begins simply, "She bled not from sword, but from longing, and it was counted holy." Historians still argue about apocryphal saints, those named in local texts but unrecognized by the Church. Some claim they were regional inventions. Others insist they were real women erased by doctrine, but kept alive in linen whispers and candle prayers. You write yours into the margins because you know that real holiness rarely fits the standard frame. You stop worrying whether the abbess will approve. She begins leaving you parchment that's already perfumed, Subtle things steeped in lemon balm or dusted with lavender starch. No explanations, no restrictions. Just quiet, holy trust. One afternoon, Sister Honoria lingers at your door watching you write. Who is that, she asks, pointing to a line that reads, Saint Amica, who turned wine to ink and made a psalter out of broken glass? She's not official, you reply. Honoria leans in, sniffs the parchment. Smells like frankincense. She's official enough. You both laugh until your ribs ache. You start collecting these saints into a separate manuscript. A different codex hidden behind a false panel in the chapel's storage chamber, where broken relics are stored like wayward thoughts. You bind the pages in scraps of blue wool. On the cover you stitch a single word remembered. Each saint gets a full page, a name, a scent, a line of verse, a symbol drawn small, a leaf, a spoon, a piece of string. You decide these are the real miracles, the mundane things made sacred by care. Quirky inclusion. Saint Elspeth, who never left the convent garden, is said to have spoken only in rhyming couplets and fed mice from her sleeves. You illustrate her page with a hand drawn in clove oil curled around a breadcrumb. You begin to read your saints aloud to Lisette in the evenings. She lies beside your writing desk head, resting on folded arms, eyes half closed, smiling with every oddity. When you finish reading about Saint Caressa, who kissed a leper on the forehead and woke up with a freckle shaped like a dove, Lisette says you're writing the lives we never thought we were allowed to live. You reply, I'm writing the lives we already live. She reaches up and plucks a violet from the jar beside your quill, tucks it behind her ear, says nothing more. That night you dream of a cathedral filled with the scent of rosemary and rosewater. No walls, no pews, just wind and light, and pages fluttering like prayer flags in a storm. You wake with a line in your mouth. She built no church, only a garden where names are spoken kindly. You write it in your apocryphal codex beside St. Tulla's entry. Her only miracle was knowing when to hold silence and when to hold someone's hand. The convent as ever breathes around you, but it's changing. More sisters hum as they work. Candles are lit not just for light, but for warmth. Pages turn with softness. Ink stains are no longer scrubbed away. Even the chapel, once austere, smells faintly of time after Vespers. Your saints have entered the walls, not by force, not by declaration, but by scent, by softness, by the lives they echo. You close your codex and whisper, amen not to doctrine, but to the daring act of remembering. You've started tucking poems into sleeves, not your own other sisters'. A line here, a verse there, sometimes a single word written in honey-colored ink and pressed between the folds of a prayer cloth or stitched into the hem of a habit. The poetry is never signed. That's part of the game. The night forgives what daylight questions. Or, you are more than your silence. The first time you slipped a folded square into Sister Colette's sleeve as she knelt in the chapel. She found it later after Compline and said nothing. But the next day she left an apple beside your bowl at breakfast polished to a shine. A reply. Soon it becomes a secret ritual. You start thinking of your lines not as confessions, but as offerings. Like the scent of incense meant to vanish but never wasted. Each verse is written in a new ink blend. One poem scented with crushed lilac and bergamot was folded into Sister Honoria's gardening gloves. Another with rosemary and ash slipped into the folds of Lisette's psalter. Quirky mishap. One verse tucked into the sleeve of a novice accidentally went through the wash. The ink bled into the linen in streaks, forming something more like a painting than a poem. The image resembled wings. She now keeps it pinned above her cot. You never acknowledge your role, and yet you are not alone. Soon poems start returning. Not yours, theirs. Small lines folded into your habit pocket, or appearing on your writing desk weighted with a smooth stone or a sprig of yarrow. One read, "You make my prayers smell like rain." Another, "Is it still silence if it sings in lavender?" You begin saving them, threading them into a hidden scroll you keep in the hollow of your writing table. You call it the chorus of the quiet. You don't know how many sisters are contributing. That's the beauty of it. The ink blends. The voices blend. Scent becomes signature. Some lines are scented with orange peel, others with fennel mint, or even the faintest trace of beeswax and salt. Historians still argue whether nuns in cloistered orders created networks of encoded communication. Some interpret surviving fragments as exercises in calligraphy, others as clandestine journals. A few believe in entire subcultures of hidden script, emotional, spiritual, even rebellious. You smile when you read that. If only they'd followed the scent. One night you write a poem specifically for Lisette, though you'll never say so. It's the first time you let yourself lean into longing. Your silence rests beside mine like dusk beside water. We do not touch, but we reflect. And that is enough to light the sky. You tuck it into the cuff of her robe during a storm when all the sisters are huddled in the chapel and thunder makes everyone's voices softer. The next day, she leaves you a broken quill tied with thread and a single word carved into the feather shaft: stay. You don't ask what she means, you know. You begin writing faster, more urgently, your fingers cramp with effort. Your ink pots are emptied twice as quickly. You find yourself humming as you work. Sometimes the chants. Sometimes something else entirely, your mother's lullabies, half-remembered street songs from the perfumery district, or tunes you're sure you've invented mid-stroke. One evening you pause mid-poem and realize you are no longer writing to survive. You're writing because this is your place, your breath, your belonging. You once feared this convent would cage you, but it has become your parchment, your page, and you are the ink. At supper, a line appears etched faintly in the crust of a loaf of bread passed around the table. You almost miss it. Blessed be the hands that sent the silence. No one says a word, but the bread tastes sweeter than usual. You look around and realize your poems have become psalms. Not sung, but shared. A storm breaks just after matins. Not the quiet, contemplative kind that murmurs through the trees like a lullaby, but a full symphony of thunder, slanted rain and winds that howl like restless saints. The chapel shutters rattle. Candles gutter. Somewhere a slate tile clatters to the ground. Most of the sisters huddle in the cloister corridor shawls, wrapped tight, eyes wide at the sky's theatrics. But you slip away. This is your favorite kind of weather, the kind that erases boundaries. The kind where silence has teeth and scent, hangs heavy in the air, trapped between thunderclaps. You return to your chamber, breathless, damp, exhilarated. Tonight you're not writing on parchment. You're writing on cloth. A square of linen no longer suitable for the altar, soft, with age stained at the corners. You pin it flat and begin your work brush in hand, dipping it into an ink you mixed 3 nights ago and have been guarding like sacred oil, rosewater, wine lees, and a drop of clove essence. It smells like dusk and memory. Each stroke is slow, careful. When the storm speaks, I answer in scent. When the walls tremble, I trace my name in silence. You're not sure what this piece is for. A banner? A wrapping cloth for the codex? Or maybe just a prayer meant to be folded and forgotten, until someone finds it years from now, holds it to their nose, and suddenly remembers you. Historians still struggle to explain the presence of ink-stained fabric fragments in certain convent crypts. Too soft for garments, too marked to be altar cloths. Some think they were scraps. You know better, they were witnesses. As you write, lightning flashes. For a moment, your whole chamber gleams as if gilded. You see your shadow on the far wall, poised mid-stroke bird-like. You wonder, not for the first time, what you look like to God in this moment. Hair-damp eyes, bright robe smudged with lavender and soot. Probably not very nun-like, and yet deeply you know you are more devoted now than you've ever been in chant. The rain drums louder. You draw a swirl of water around your verse ink bleeding slightly into the threads. It's imperfect. It's alive. There's a knock. Lisette. She enters without speaking. Her sleeves are soaked. Her veil clings to her cheeks. She looks like something half-formed from rain clouds and faith. You pass her the cloth. She takes it like it's a relic. It smells like a storm I had forgotten, she says softly. You hand her the brush. She hesitates. Dips it anyway. She writes just one word beneath your verse here. You nod. Nothing more needs to be said. Quirky memory. You once asked your mother what rain smelled like when it hit rose petals. She smiled and said, like honesty. Brief and impossible to keep. You didn't understand then, but you do now. After Lisette leaves, you hang the cloth near the window to dry, watching as the ink settles deeper into the weave. The storm begins to fade. The thunder softens. A hush reclaims the cloister. You lie back on your cot listening to the gentle drip of water from the eaves, and you feel something unusual peace. Not the brittle kind you used to chase in long prayers and long silences, but a full-bodied, fragrant peace, the kind that knows its own name, the kind that has been stitched and steeped and storm-kissed. You murmur a line into the darkness. Let my pages wrinkle with rain. Let my poems smell of thunder. Let whoever finds them know I was not afraid to write during the storm. And as you drift into sleep, you imagine the cloth still swaying by the window, soft and heavy with meaning. A verse born from a storm and sealed with scent. Confession is not always a searchlight. Sometimes it's a stage. You sit in the wooden box, veiled, silent, waiting. The curtain smells of dust and oranges. The priest on the other side, an outsider, clears his throat with the gravity of someone preparing to listen to tragedy. But you have no tragedy to offer. You have stories. You begin softly. I've sinned through ink. He chuckles, which throws you. We've all scribbled something we regret, sister. You consider saying no? I've written too much of myself and left the door open. But instead you say, I've used rosewater as ink. Silence. Then that's not a sin. You lean forward, and time, and honey, and ash from the chapel's palm branches. I've written psalms that never existed and saints who never lived. I've sent poetry into other sisters' sleeves and hidden verses in the pockets of the laundry mistress. The curtain rustles. He shifts. That's creative. You almost laugh. But is it penitence, he adds? No, you whisper. It's survival. You hear nothing for a while. Then, have you broken obedience, you smile. Obedience to what historians still argue whether confessions of creativity ever made it into convent records. Some scrolls list vague sins, improper meditation, imaginative indulgence, excessive use of scent. You imagine those were women like you too vivid, too alive, too unwilling to let their minds rust behind stone walls. The priest says, do you regret it? You pause. The question is too large to answer in this box. Instead, you say, I've learned that silence and ink are sisters, and sometimes one must speak for the other. He sighs, then offers a penance copy Psalm 51 3 times. You nod. You've done worse. When you leave, the air in the chapel is cold. You sit on the last pew and stare at the statue of the Virgin. Her stone robe has flecks of gold leaf still clinging to the folds. You wonder who painted them. You wonder if she ever felt like a canvas. Later that evening, you write Psalm 51 once in the assigned scriptorium copybook, but the second time you write it your way. You keep the bones of the original, but you dress it in your own voice. Have mercy on me, ink of mercy, scent of forgotten women. Wash me not only of sin, but of silence. Let my tongue be perfumed again. Let my bones write. You leave the third copy blank. Instead, you fold a page scented with lemon balm and frankincense and tuck it between the others. On it you've written, if regret smells like wax, then joy smells like thyme pressed into warm bread, and I refuse to confess joy. You hide this in your book of not prayers, next to the poem from Lisette, the one that still smells faintly of clove and the inside of her robe. Quirky detail. One of your hidden poems somehow ended up tucked into the pages of the visitor's psalter. No one knows how. The visiting sacristan found it sniffed and said, "This smells hopeful." He didn't return the page. That still counts as publication, doesn't it? You begin to wonder how many of your fragments are floating around the world, now slipped into hymnals, tucked behind loose stones, pressed into bundles of herbs, sent to the infirmary. You picture someone years from now lifting a page that smells of old jasmine and reading. She wrote in scent because sound was too sharp, and understanding you completely. Lisette sits beside you that night in the garden. The storms washed everything clean. The moon is too large, the air too sweet. I heard your penance, she says. You nod. Did you do it? You reach into your robe and hand her the lemon balm page. Sort of. She reads it once, twice, then says, Psalm 51 smells better now. And the two of you sit there beneath the fig tree, breathing in the scent of a rewritten prayer. News arrives with the pilgrims dusted in road and rumors. They come through the convent gates in clusters, their sandals frayed, their eyes bright with exhaustion. Most seek rest a cup of boiled barley, a place to bow their heads and pretend they've found holiness on purpose. But their tongues are loose, especially after food. You volunteer for the kitchen that day, all the better to listen. One whispers of a bishop in disgrace. Another speaks of a convent downriver whose nuns were caught writing unauthorized music. The last story, though, that one hits you like cold water to the lungs. There's talk of a heresy spreading. Says a merchant's son with sun-cracked lips. A sect that believes scent itself is a form of prayer. That to breathe deeply is to commune. He laughs into his soup like it's the wildest thing he's ever heard. You freeze mid-stir. Lisette meets your eye across the hearth. Says nothing. But her hand reaches for her pocket where she's kept a poem of yours folded beneath her rosary for weeks. Later that evening in your scriptorium chamber, you unroll the scroll you haven't dared touch since winter. Your oldest pages? The first blends of rose and soot. You sniff each carefully like revisiting childhood. Historians still argue whether mystical sects branched from official orders or bloomed independently in solitude. But you understand now it doesn't matter where the idea began. What matters is that it's spreading. You are not alone. You write a new poem in lavender ash ink, bold and centered on the page. If scent is heresy, let me be excommunicated by lilies. Let roses be my gospel and honey my holy water. You sign it with the drawing of your hand, fingers open palm upward, a gesture of offering. The next morning you leave the scroll rolled tight and place it on the outer chapel bench, where guests rest their backs and leave behind sweat and song. You tuck a sprig of rosemary inside the ribbon and walk away without looking back. The air is changing, not just among your sisters. The pilgrims, too. A young girl who'd been traveling with her mother asks you, "Why does it smell so nice here? The other places only smell like stone." You say, "Because our prayers linger?" She nods like this makes perfect sense. Quirky moment. That same girl leaves you a thank you gift, a tiny linen pouch filled with dried orange peel and 2 crushed cloves. Inside is a single word written on paper, "safe." You pin it beside your cot. The sisters begin talking more freely now. Not recklessly, never that, but with a kind of undercurrent like a stream flowing beneath polite conversation. "I think Sister Aldith is writing a hymn," Lisette whispers one morning. You think she was humming? It rhymed. And at supper, Sister Colette asks if anyone has extra mint. Not for illness, she adds, for remembering. You share your garden stores, your ink blends, even your scraps of linen. You begin hosting quiet gatherings. No announcement, no formality. Just candles, cloth, quills, and pages that smell like orchards and dreams. Sisters come bearing verses stitched into their sleeves. Some bring drawings. One brings a story she claims was passed down through 4 generations of women, all named after herbs. Each piece is read aloud softly, each one followed by silence that holds the echo like breath in cupped hands. Historians still wonder if women ever formed conventual literary circles. There are faint hints in letters, footnotes, and forgotten ledgers. But your circle isn't meant for history. It's meant for now, for joy, for resistance dressed as fragrance. Lisette writes her first full-page poem. She reads it aloud while the candle burns low. I was told to keep quiet. So I did. And in that quiet, I made a cathedral of scent. No bells, just breath. No psalms, just petals. You weep, but silently. You think of your codex hidden still, its spine warm with secrets and saffron. You wonder how long it will remain yours alone. And then you wonder if one day it will be found. Not by scholars, not by bishops, but by someone like you. Nose tilted slightly toward the page, catching the faintest trace of lavender, and longing, whispering, "I know this scent." Your codex is gone. You lift the chapel tile, heart calm, as always fingers sure, and find only an absence. No parchment, no folded linen, no scent of rose, nor clove, nor lavender. Just empty air. At first you think you've made a mistake. That perhaps you've lifted the wrong tile, or that you moved it recently in a haze of ink and forgot. But no. The shape of the hollow is unmistakable, softened by years of careful tucking. This is the place. And it is hollow. You kneel there longer than you should hand, resting in the empty niche as if waiting for the parchment to reappear. It does not. You do not panic. Instead, you sit. Quiet. A little stunned. The others continue their evening routine, singing the last lines of the Marian antiphon, shuffling off to their cells. Lisette catches your eye briefly. You shake your head once. She understands. Later that night, she brings you warm milk and a pouch of cinnamon. She says nothing but sets them beside you and rests her hand over yours, just long enough for the warmth to matter. You spend the night awake, not weeping, not fearing, just listening. The silence is different now, not empty. It feels occupied, like someone has read your breath. In the morning, a single page is waiting for you on your scriptorium desk. It's one of yours, but not one you remember giving away. It's pressed flat, the ink perfectly preserved, the edges trimmed with care. It smells faintly of sage. Beneath your original verse written in handwriting that is not your own, she writes with the ink of memory. Let her not forget her own flame. Historians still debate whether manuscripts disappeared due to theft, decay, or censorship. But sometimes, just sometimes, they were taken as gifts. You think you've been gifted back. Whoever took your codex did not destroy it. They read it. You stare at the page, fingers tingling. Someone read you. Someone followed the scent. You close your eyes and breathe it in again. Sage, soot, faint rose. The air tightens behind your eyes, you swallow. Quirky aftermath. Sister Aldith notices your changed mood and offers you a plum. When you bite into it, there's a folded scrap of cloth hidden beneath the stone in your bowl. It reads, "Not all things hidden are lost. Some simply take flight." You laugh loud enough to earn a raised brow from Sister Honoria. You begin writing again that evening, slowly at first. You don't attempt to recreate the old manuscript. That would be like replanting petals from ashes. Instead, you start a new codex. This one bound in faded blue linen gifted by the infirmarian. Your first page reads, "For those who sent the silence," and below that Codex Volatilis, the book that flew. This time you bind each page with a sprig of dried thyme. Lisette helps you stitch the cover. The pages are looser, less formal. There is more breathing space in the margins. It feels lighter. Not as if you are transcribing history, but as if you are writing into the wind. You imagine your first codex wherever it is now, tucked into a saddlebag, passed hand to hand among wandering sisters, maybe even resting on an altar somewhere unfamiliar, its scent creeping into the wood like a forgotten hymn. And someone somewhere is reading, "Let no woman forget the scent of her own voice." You think that is enough. You turn to your fresh parchment and begin a new verse. She lost the words she once wrote, but not the hands that wrote them. She lost the scent, but not the garden. And as the ink dries, the room fills again, not with loss, but with something closer to return. It's Lisette who finds the ashes. She doesn't bring them to you. She waits until twilight when the air softens and the light turns the cloister's stone corridors the color of pressed lavender. Then she sits beside you on the chapel steps and lays a small bundle in your lap linen, folded tight, tied with fraying thread. You know before unwrapping it, the scent tells you first faint rose bitter soot, the ghost of clove. The fabric is warm as if it's held something breathing. When you unfold it, the ashes are fine, delicate, almost soft. You don't ask where she found them. You don't ask how she knew they were yours. Because you do know. They are all that's left of one of your oldest pages, the one about your mother's breath in the garden, and how silence smelled like saffron when she left. You remember every line. You don't need the ink. You only needed the chance to touch it again one last time. Lisette rests her head against your shoulder. "I thought you might want to return them to the earth," she says. You nod. No words. Just quiet. Historians still puzzle over the practice of burying manuscripts. Some cite ritual. Others say shame. A few suggest love. You believe it's a mixture of all three steeped like herbs in boiling memory. You walk together that night to the edge of the garden, the part near the rosemary hedge where the soil is loose and loamy. You kneel not as a penitent, but as a planter. You scatter the ashes slowly as if they might still sing. Lisette places a single petal beside them. Not a rose, a calendula. Bright. Defiant. And then she murmurs, "Let the ink become root." You smile though your throat aches. Quirky moment. As you rise, your sleeve brushes the hedge and a small rosemary branch snaps off. You catch it before it falls. The broken stem releases a rush of scent, sharp, resinous healing. Lisette closes her eyes. You take it as a sign. Back in your chamber, you begin a new piece not for the codex, but for the ashes. A page meant to stay behind, not to be hidden but kept in the open, hung on the inside of your door like a relic. Here lies the page that burned, not from shame but from breath. It is not lost, it is returned. Ink to soot, soot to soil, memory to root. You scent the page with rosemary oil and bind it with a thread of orange wool. You do not cry, but you light a candle and sit with it as it dries. Lisette sits too, her head on your knee, now her hand curled loosely in yours. No one speaks. The candle flickers like a heartbeat. The silence feels complete. You think of all the things you've buried in this convent. Fear, longing, pages, names, even your own voice once. But each time something buried, something else grew. And tonight, in the place of one lost page, something tender rises. You take the rosemary stem and tuck it into your psalter, just beside Psalm 30. You turned my mourning into dancing. You think of adding a line. But you don't. Instead, you close the book, press your cheek to its worn leather, and breathe deeply. Because scent is how memory prays. And prayer tonight is made of ashes and rosemary and the warmth of someone staying beside you long after the verse has ended. You begin writing hymns to a God who smells like rain on stone. Not the God from the pulpit booming untouchable, but the one who walks barefoot through the garden before lauds brushing rosemary with a fingertip. The one who lingers in the chapel just after everyone's gone, warming the air like a hearth, still holding yesterday's flame. You don't call these hymns aloud. You hum them. Quietly. While gathering herbs, while grinding ink, while threading ribbon through the edge of a new page. Each one is stitched from breath and scent. Each one anchored by the same refrain, "You are here. You are here, you are here." Lisette begins harmonizing with you wordlessly, like her lungs know the melody before her mouth does. Sometimes she adds rhythm with a pestle against the edge of your writing table. Sometimes her presence is the rhythm. The words are simple, but the scent, that's where the meaning lives. One hymn, written entirely in ink made from lemon verbena and ash, fills the scriptorium chamber with a brightness so sharp that Sister Aldith stops at your door, tilts her head and mutters, "Smells like the sun woke up in here." You don't explain. Instead, you copy the hymn onto a page lined with pressed petals and leave it folded on the chapel pew closest to the broken crucifix. The next morning, it's gone. That afternoon, a scrap of paper appears in your basket of rosemary cuttings. One line in another hand. "If the sun is waking, may it wake me gently." You smile so wide it aches. Historians often dismissed convent music as derivative copies of Gregorian modes passed down like watered wine. But among women like you, hymns were more than melody. They were memory strung through breath. They were the scent of belief made audible. You write a new line that night, "I do not sing to be heard. I sing to remember how it feels to bloom." The line goes on a piece of cloth instead of parchment. You scent it with sage and stitch it into the lining of your robe over your heart. It hums against your skin as you move. quirky discovery, Lisette finds that when ink made with honey and cinnamon is left near the window, it thickens like syrup and hums ever so slightly in the sun. It sings, she says. You're not sure if she's teasing, but she holds the jar close to her ear and smiles like she knows a secret. That evening you make her a page of music. Not notes, not notation, just lines of scent. Each line a different blend. Top to bottom rosemary and ash. Thyme and fig. Basil and myrrh. Rose and vinegar. Lavender and breath. She doesn't read it, she smells it. Then she says, this one smells like the moment before you laugh. And for the first time in days you do. You begin composes more. A hymn for the candle smoke. A verse for the beeswax drawer. A psalm for the hour between matins and lauds, when the dew hasn't yet evaporated from the garden stones. You write, I praise you with ink that doesn't stay put, with pages that curl, with fragrance that forgets how to behave. One morning, Sister Honoria begins humming your melody during kitchen duty, the one you thought you'd only ever sung under your breath. Lisette joins in. No one names it, no one claims it. But soon 5 sisters are humming as they chop beets as they rinse the lentils. The chapel echoes faintly with rhythm now, even when silent. The abbess never mentions it, but at supper she serves plum compote steeped with lavender. You're certain that's her way of saying, well done. You realize you've created a scent circle. Not a formal group, not a rebellion. Just a rhythm of presence. A way of writing prayers through aroma of letting belief linger long after the voice stops speaking. You don't want to lead it, you want to breathe with it. And as night falls and the candle beside your desk gutters low, you add one last line to your new hymn. If this is not music, may it be mercy. If this is not doctrine, may it still deliver. And the ink dries sweet on the page like a lullaby left in a warm room for someone else to find. It begins in the laundry. A poem barely legible scrawled across the hem of a scapular, written in a soft green ink that smells of mint and sage. The words wobble slightly. Someone wrote it with trembling hands or perhaps in haste. You stitch the sky into my breath. Now I exhale stars. You find it while folding linens beside Sister Honoria. You tuck it quickly into your sleeve before she can see, but she's already smiling. That one's not mine, she says, as if you'd asked, but it is beautiful. And just like that, you know the movement has grown beyond your hands. The words are everywhere now. Verses hidden in the folds of bedsheets. Couplets inked on the inside lids of herb jars. Lines of longing woven between prayers. Scented writing in the wash is risky. One overly warm basin and the ink bleeds. But the sisters have grown clever. They stitch waterproof threads into the corners. They wrap verses in waxed linen. One even etched a haiku with a sewing needle into the seam of a robe. God smells like fig leaves, morning light through stained windows, my skin after rain. You begin calling these secret messages the wash psalms. You imagine someone years from now unwrapping a bundle of robes and catching the scent of verbena only to find a love letter to the divine stitched into the lining. Historians will likely never know. But you do. You start your own set. Every week you add a poem to the laundry rotation. Always unsigned. Always scented. One week it's thyme and soot. Another bay and wine lees. Once you try marjoram with beeswax and the result smells like a forest after stormlight. One verse simply reads, "Let me be folded in your mercy creased but unforgotten." Lisette finds it during folding hour. She doesn't say anything. But later your robe smells faintly of cinnamon. and a page appears in your writing drawer with her soft, slanted hand. I wear your prayers. You keep that one in your codex. Quirky incident. A traveling friar arrives requesting a robe be laundered after a long journey. When it's returned, he remarks confused but smiling that it now smells like poetry. You try not to grin. Sister Aldith nearly chokes on her cider. The abbess begins to pretend she doesn't notice. But you catch her fingers once lingering on a towel embroidered with a tiny verse, I dried my tears on linen faith. She folds it more slowly than necessary, then walks away without a word. You begin to understand something important scent travels faster than history. Even if your pages vanish, your poems will remain in folds and fibers in breath. You start experimenting further. You blend ink that changes scent with heat, rosemary turning to rose when warmed by hands. You mix lilac with lemon peel and discover a sharpness that makes the words feel urgent. You try writing on silk, on wool, on the inside of your shoes, and always your lines slip through the wash like confessions. Sometimes after prayers you imagine the air in the cloister thickening with all the verses you've scattered. Not heavy but fragrant, a vapor of unseen prayers. You begin crafting a new kind of relic small cloth scrolls, no longer than a palm scented and stitched with single lines of poetry. You hide them inside the hems of cloaks, under altar cloths, once inside the hollow of a broken candlestick. You call them breathlets, short breaths of belief. Lisette makes a dozen more. Her lines are sharper like wind. She spoke in verbs, even while kneeling. My vow was silence. But the wind told everyone anyway. You imagine someone centuries from now unrolling one of these and being surprised that something so old still smells like longing? Historians often overlook the domestic laundry kitchen garden as places of invention. But you know now the most sacred acts happen when the hands are busy and the mind is free. Tonight you stand in the laundry room long after the others have gone breathing in the mingled scent of rosemary vinegar soap and thyme. You close your eyes and whisper, let me pass unseen, but let my breath remain. You press a final line into a fresh robe, fold it tightly and smile, because the revolution is washing itself into the fabric of the place. And no one, not bishop, not scribe, not fire, can scrub it out now. You begin calling it the Midnight Reading Circle, though no one calls it anything aloud and certainly not in front of the abbess. It started innocently enough, 4 sisters, 1 candle, 1 scroll. You gathered in the infirmary after final prayers where the air always smells faintly of sage and soap, and no one checks too closely. Technically, you were there to mend linens. Technically. But in truth, you were there to listen. You read the first time, a hymn stitched into the seam of a cloak. Short, sharp with a strange rhythm that made Lisette tap her foot unconsciously. Let no one call me voiceless if I fill the air with scent. The others breathed deeply. The next night, Sister Colette brought a page. It smelled like orange peel and rosemary and read, Heaven is a hallway where every woman's footsteps echo fully freely. You knew then the circle would grow roots. It didn't take long before others began contributing. One night it was a verse folded inside a clean bandage. Another time a scrap of wool etched with the stylus no ink at all, just pressure and faith. The words caught light like memory I was stitched with names you'll never say aloud. But you've worn me in every breath. The readings weren't planned. Some nights you sat in silence, the candle flickering between you, the scent of marjoram or fig rising from the scrolls like ghost songs. Other times someone read something so beautiful that it felt like the walls leaned in. Lisette began collecting the verses in a jar. She called them embers, small, warm, nearly invisible, but capable of lighting anything if handled with reverence. Quirky moment Sister Aldith once fell asleep mid-reading scroll in hand, head against a bundle of fresh linens. She snored so sweetly no one had the heart to wake her. You simply slipped the scroll back into her pocket and blew out the candle. Historians often miss these things. They look for official records, monastic logs, signatures in the margins. But the real stories live in breath, in gatherings without names, in midnight readings where the only choir is the soft sound of sisters inhaling words that were never meant to be sung. One night the circle grows to 5, then 6. No one says a word about the growth. You simply add another cushion past the candle, share the lavender tea Lisette started steeping in secret. You read a new verse. One you didn't write. It's unsigned, but you know the hand. It's smaller, uncertain, like a voice not used to being heard. The ink is faint, but the scent lemon balm and myrrh lingers long after the words fade. They told me God only speaks in thunder. So I wrote in petals and hoped she might whisper back. You don't speak after. None of you do. The silence feels thick, sacred, like honey slowly warming. You press the scroll flat and add it to the jar. Later in your own chamber, you begin a new page in your codex. Not a poem, a map. You sketch the midnight circle positions. T scents the flow of candlelight. No names, just symbols. Lisette is marked with a violet sprig. Colette is a bird. Aldith a curled cat. You a quill. At the bottom you write, this is not rebellion, this is respiration. The next evening the candle is already lit when you arrive. A scroll is waiting. It reads, your silence taught me to listen. Your ink taught me to speak. You smile and the scent that rises time lavender, a trace of vinegar tells you exactly who wrote it. You place it in the jar now nearly full and whisper the only thing that matters more. You begin dreaming of lavender and fire. In the dream, your pages are stacked like bricks, each one glowing faintly, edges curling with gold light. You walk among them, barefoot, unafraid. The fire does not burn. It warms, it whispers. Each flame flickers with a scent. Rosemary, clove, myrrh, fig, rose time until the air becomes a cathedral of memory. And always at the center, your codex. Open. Breathing. You wake with the scent of smoke in your nose and the unmistakable feeling that your writing is no longer yours alone. That morning the convent is unusually quiet. A storm had passed in the night, the kind that knocks branches from trees and rattles the shutters loose. The ground is wet, the sky still half sulking. You find the garden changed. Leaves strewn like pages. A linen scrap caught in the rosemary hedge, one of your breathlets, wind-blown and damp, but still holding the faintest trace of mint and ink. You smooth it flat. The words are barely legible, but yours. Let no prayer go unscented, no silence unnamed. You take it as an omen. That afternoon, the abbess calls you to her chamber. You enter expecting a reckoning. Instead, she gestures to the seat beside her where a page sits on the table, your page. One of the early ones. A verse about Saint Meralda of the clay hands. It's been pressed, preserved. She has added a border of inked ivy. I found this in the reliquary drawer, she says, not looking at you. I thought it was misplaced, but now I think it was left. You say nothing. She lifts the page and inhales almost imperceptibly. You've started something here, she murmurs. Something fragrant, something foolish, something holy. She hands you the page. Keep writing. And then, because this is how such conversations go, she returns to her ledger and begins cataloging wool quantities for the winter. Audience over. You walk out stunned. Historians still puzzle over documents where abbesses appear to sanction creative works, unofficially through silence, marginal notes, occasional gifts of parchment or ink. But in truth, those women wielded their power in soft touches and sidelong nods. You now carry one of these nods in your chest. That night you cannot sleep. Not from fear, but from fire. You return to the scriptorium, alone. Candle lit, quill poised, and you begin your boldest page yet. When the voices stopped, I wrote with fragrance. When the eyes turned away, I bloomed. They thought fire would destroy me. But I soaked my pages in honey. So I burned slow, sweet, and bright, and unashamed. The ink smells of sage and citrus peel. You breathe it in until the lines blur. Quirky realization. You've begun dreaming of places you've never seen, libraries built of fabric voices, speaking in spices, hands that bless not with water, but with oil. It's as if your scent script has begun to write you in return. You whisper to your codex you've grown wild. And I love you for it. Lisette joins you before dawn. She doesn't speak, just adds a line to your page. She did not fear the flames she fed them. Together you roll the page, wrap it in violet ribbon, and place it in the altar drawer beneath the broken crucifix. You do not hide it, you offer it. The candle burns low, the light flickers, and just before it dies you see your breath rise visible for a moment, carrying the scent of ink and hope in every word you never dared say aloud. You smile, because the flame is not a threat. It is an invitation. The archives are cold. Always. Tucked beneath the convent, the floor is made of stone slick with the breath of centuries. The air smells of ink that's lost its voice, beeswax, and paper that forgot the sun. Only the archivist Sister Emelina dares linger here for long, muttering to herself, as she shuffles past shelves with fingers as ink-stained as yours. You bribe her with candied quince, a rare treasure, one you've hoarded for weeks in a jar hidden behind the vinegar. She eyes the jar, then you. I'm not supposed to let you down here, she mutters. I'm not supposed to write with rosewater, you reply. She grins and unhooks the key from her belt. Within moments, you're alone among the shelves wrapped in stillness. Not silence. Stillness, a deeper thing. You run your fingers along spines that crackle softly beneath your touch. Most are catalogued prayers, land grants, boring reports on barley harvests. But a few feel different. You find one wrapped in blue wool labeled Obsolete Psalms Revisions. It smells faintly of lemon and something like clove. You open it slowly. The handwriting is unfamiliar, small, tidy, but feminine. The first page reads, "He said I should only write of glory, so I wrote of baking bread in the dark, and God still answered." You exhale. Sit cross-legged on the floor. There are more verses, more oddities. A page of botanical sketches with ink made from something green and oily. A pressed moth pinned between verses about transformation. A scroll folded into itself, scented with cedar and ending in the line, "I do not need to rise to be divine. I only need to stay." Historians still puzzle over these fringe manuscripts labeled curious or unverified in records. Many were attributed to anonymous scribes. Some even believed to be fakes. But you know the truth. This is your kin. Not by blood, but by ink. Quirky discovery. One scroll ends with a recipe fig compote laced with thyme and prayers for courage. It's annotated in the margin. Worked. Twice. You copy it into your sleeve. Sister Emelina eventually wanders in carrying a lamp and a look of faux irritation. still breathing. You show her the scroll with the fig recipe. She squints, sniffs, then smirks. She wrote with cinnamon once, smelled up the whole basement. We all pretended not to notice. She, Emelina, shrugs. Abbess before last, or the one before her. Who knows? You realize then the tradition didn't start with you. You're just the one who stopped hiding it. Back in your chamber, you unfold the new scrolls. Lisette arrives with 2 quills and a small pot of marjoram ink. Neither of you says a word. You simply write. She baked words into walls. She wrote truth on fig leaves. She sang in pantry corners and whispered into the folds of veils. And no one ever caught her, because she smelled like the prayers everyone wanted to believe in. You tuck the page inside your new codex. Then you place the older scrolls inside the drawer beside your own. Because these are not just relics, they are continuity. The ink may have changed, the hands may differ, but the scent is unmistakable defiance, gentleness, belief. Lisette rests her head on your shoulder. We're not the first, she whispers. You smile. And we won't be the last. Outside the bell rings for supper, but you remain seated. Because some meals are not served on plates. Some are made of paper and petals and permission passed down like flame. A courier arrives bearing citrus. Not lemons, but bitter Seville oranges, thick-skinned, freckled, glowing like little suns trapped in their own rind. A gift from a sister convent in the south near the warm coastline, where the sea air sharpens everything sweet, and every prayer smells faintly of salt and fruit peel. The oranges arrive in a basket lined with blue linen, tied with a ribbon that smells unexpectedly of basil and wax. Hidden beneath them is a note, just one line. We heard you're sent from here. You freeze. Your fingers sticky with juice. You read the line again. It's unsigned, unstamped. No formal greeting, no seal of the abbess. Just that single sentence scrawled in a hand, not unlike yours, feminine, angled, confident. You show it to Lisette. Her eyes go wide. They know. You don't ask who they are, because you do know. The sisterhood is spreading like smoke, like lavender on linen, like ink into parchment when it's still warm from the sun. Historians still argue about the existence of informal convent networks, circles of women connected, not by doctrine, but by whisper. Letters passed beneath loaves of bread, poems stitched into hems, recipes coded in scripture margins. There are traces, fragments, but they never managed to catch the whole fragrance. You, however, are living inside it. You write a reply that night, not on parchment, but on citrus peel. We bloom where the fire did not reach. Thank you for breathing us in. You dry the peels near the window. Lisette wraps them in muslin and places them in the outgoing donation satchel. No return address, just sent. Later, as you walk through the cloister, you notice something new. A sister in the corner scribbling with bay leaf ink. 2 novices hanging small scented sachets on the infirmary hooks. A ribbon pinned to the statue of Saint Agatha, threaded with a verse. She survived the fire by scenting the ashes. You recognize your line, but it's not yours anymore. It belongs to the air now. Quirky incident. A chicken wanders into the chapel during none. No one knows how it got past the garden gate. It perches beside the altar, sniffs the air, yes, really, and pecks at the sandalwood-scented scroll tied to the bench. Sister Honoria yells. Sister Aldith laughs so hard she drops her rosary. You rename the chicken incense. She becomes a legend. That night, you revise your codex's opening page. Beneath Codex Volatilis, you now write a record of all that could not be caged. You decorate the border with tiny sketches, citrus peel a candle, a sleeping chicken, a drop of lavender oil, a woman's hand, writing over and over again. Lisette gifts you a stamp carved from fig wood. Its emblem, a sprig of rosemary crossed with a quill. You press it onto the next page and scent the ink with thyme. It leaves a mark that smells like forgiveness and hope, and something larger than both. The next morning, your codex is heavier, not with pages, but with meaning, because every line now has weight behind it. Not just your breath, but the breath of sisters miles away across hills and rivers, and the boundaries of propriety. You write, "If I vanish, let my ink remain. If my name fades, let the scent speak." You begin signing each new page not with your name, but with the symbol quill and rosemary. It spreads, like wildfire, but cool, gentle, blooming rather than burning. Lisette kisses your temple one evening and whispers, "You've built a gospel of breath." And as you place another scented scroll inside the candle niche near the chapel gate, you realize you have not broken the silence. You've rewritten it. Winter arrives dressed in hush. The garden stiffens beneath frost. Ink thickens in its pots. Breath becomes visible at dawn. Small clouds rising from each sister's lips like prayers too tender to speak aloud. The scent of cinnamon bread seeps into cloister stone, mingling with wax and wood smoke. You write slower now, not out of fatigue but reverence, because winter, more than any season, teaches you to savor what stays. You spend your mornings gathering rosemary cut low before the freeze lavender dried months ago, but still potent and mint, you pressed between the psalms of your breviary. Your afternoons are spent near the hearth, the codex warm against your legs, the ink warming in small ceramic pots beside the fire. Lisette works beside you in silence. You no longer need words. Today you write, "We are not quiet by nature. We are quiet by craft." There is a difference. The ink smells of cedar and bay. It dries slower in the cold, so you leave the page open on the table, letting the scent rise like steam from steeping leaves. That night, someone leaves you a new page, folded neatly, bound in crimson thread. It reads, "Your fire reached us in snow. We lit our own." Beneath it, a pressed camellia petal. You hold it to your nose. It smells faintly of clove and ink. Faintly of you. Faintly of someone else's courage. Historians have no record of scented sisterhoods crossing monasteries, but here it is, one petal. One folded page passed like warmth between hidden fires. Quirky moment. The novices try to make ink from mulled wine for a feast day hymn. The result stains 3 fingers permanently purple and makes the hymn smell distractingly delicious. Sister Honoria nearly breaks her vow of silence mid-vespers to reprimand them. You sneak them plum tarts as consolation. You write that night with a smile. Some gospels begin with wine. Ours begins with laughter and berries on the tongue. The scroll goes into the winter drawer. You've begun dividing the codex by season, not by chapter, but by scent. Spring smells like nettles and lemon balm. Summer like rosemary and sun-warmed stone. Autumn holds fig and myrrh. Winter is cedar, clove, frost, and fire. Lisette begins composing snow hymns poems that smell cold. She finds a way to distill crushed juniper into ink. One line written in her careful hand, "God wears wool and breathes clouds in winter." You add it to your margin in silver ink. You begin to think of your work not just as writing, but as layering like wool over linen, scent over silence, memory over ink. Each scroll, each verse, each fold is a way of keeping the cold out, or letting warmth in. One night you dream of fire again, but this time it doesn't consume. It circles, it dances, it laughs. You wake with a single word in your mouth, safe. The air in your cell smells like rosemary and something unnameable, something born of all the others. You press your face into your sleeves and breathe deeply. You write, even snow can carry fragrance. Even silence can hum. You ink the final line with juniper and tuck it into a mitten. Later at supper, a scroll appears on your bench, wrapped in linen, scented with anise and nettle. The words, "We thought we were alone." Then your scent crossed the wind. You fold it into your codex, no longer surprised. Only grateful, because winter has arrived. But you are not cold, and neither is the world you've scented with breath. The first thaw arrives in a whisper. Not a flood, not a roar, just a single drop from the chapel eaves falling with the soft plink onto stone that hasn't felt sky in months. You pause your writing mid-line to listen. Another drop. And another. Spring begins not with bloom but with breath. In the garden, rosemary pricks through ice-hardened soil, stubborn as always. The lavender holds back, cautious. But the mint, bold little thing sends up a sprig already scented with promise. You dip your fingers into the softening earth. It smells like return. Lisette brings you a scroll tied in blue thread. From the courier, she says, as if that explains everything. It doesn't need to. The thread carries the faint scent of citrus salt and candle smoke. You untie it carefully. The handwriting is unfamiliar, more angular, rushed, but the spirit is clear. It reads, "We sang your words at dusk. The sky turned violet. The children called it holy." You stare for a long time, not at the words, but at the faint smudge at the bottom. Someone's thumbprint dipped in bossel ink. The sisters from the southern convent, again. You tuck the scroll into your codex now, thick with memory. So thick, in fact, that the spine has begun to warp. Pages lean into one another like sisters whispering during prayers. You begin crafting a new volume, Codex 2. But this one isn't only yours. You invite Lisette to add her verses directly, not just margins, then Colette, then Sister Emelina, who to everyone's shock, writes a devastatingly tender ode to cracked ink pots and solitude. Even Honoria contributes, leaving a small prayer in her stiff hand. "Bless the hands that stain robes with praise." You scent it with almond oil and rose, then tuck it beneath the title page. Codex 2 smells different. It smells like we. Historians often misread communal authorship as confusion. They search for one voice, one author, one hand. But you know better. This is not confusion. This is chorus. The scent is what binds it. That spring you hold the first scented vigil. It begins at dusk. A quiet gathering in the infirmary garden, now thawed and alive with wind. Each sister brings one page, one line, one object that holds fragrance. They do not read aloud. They simply breathe. Mint in sleeves, cinnamon stitched into pockets, rose petals folded into the hems of robes. Even Incense the chicken wears a sprig of lavender tied gently to her leg. She is unusually still that evening, as if she too understands this is not a moment to flap or peck or interrupt. You place your own offering into the center of the circle, a scroll wrapped in rosemary, its ink made from early nettles and morning dew. It reads, "When the world grew loud, I scented the silence. When it dimmed, I let my breath glow. No one claps, no one speaks. But every sister exhales at once, and for that moment, the entire garden breathes as one. Quirky moment a passing goat from the neighboring farm wanders into the circle, attracted by the scent. It noses Colette's sandalwood sachet and bleats once sharply, almost approvingly, before being led away by a novice, trying very hard not to laugh. You return to your chamber that night, scented in time lavender mint goat in memory. You write one final line in your original codex: "This is not the end. This is how a garden begins." And you press a sprig of mint between the last two pages, because even now, with the thaw barely begun, you know, there are more scrolls to be written, more breathlets to be sown, more sisters out there breathing deeply, waiting for the scent of something sacred to drift their way. The bishop arrives in a cloud of dust and skepticism. His horse is haughty. His robes are pressed so crisply they practically chime when he moves. And his nose wrinkles the moment he enters the chapel, detecting perhaps the faintest trace of clove ink and something more defiant. You greet him with a bow, your robe smelling faintly of juniper and lavender oil. Lisette stands beside you, hands folded, face calm. The abbess watches from the far end of the room, face unreadable, lips thinned into diplomacy. He doesn't look at your codex. He looks at your hands. Still scribbling, sister, he asks, tone like a knife left in cold water. You nod, still breathing. There's a pause. He blinks. You've become quite the scribe. You smile with only half your mouth. It's a habit now. He makes a sound something between a chuckle and a dismissal and steps into the cloister. Historians have preserved dozens of bishop-led inspections of female convents records full of measurements and reprimands. But the real stories happen in the folds between visits and the soft rebellions beneath their noses. This time you're ready. The bishop is here for 3 days. During that time, you and the sisters carry out your work precisely as expected on the surface. You recite the Psalms. You scrub the stone floors. You prepare bread and steep tea. But under the edges of each act of verse waits. A breathlet is tucked into the corner of the prayer bench. A scroll is slid into the seam of a kitchen curtain. Each one unscented temporarily. The trick is heat. On the final day of his stay, with the bishop seated in the chapel for evening prayers, the sun drops low. Light spills in through the west windows, warming the walls, warming the verses. The scroll hidden behind the altar begins to release rosemary. The prayer cushion exhales cinnamon. Even the bishop's own chair somehow, thank Lisette, sighs faintly of lemon balm and nettle. He shifts uncomfortably. "Smells like a garden in here," he mutters. No one responds. The abbess coughs softly into her sleeve. "You do not smile, you do, however, begin to sing. It's a hymn. Not one of yours, not originally, but scented softly with rosemary-infused ink. And so it is yours now." And the sisters join in, one by one, voices barely above breath. The harmony is imperfect, but the scent is exact. The bishop listens. He does not comment, but his hand draped casually over the edge of the pew traces something. A groove. A line of pressed-in words just below the varnish. You know the verse by heart. We hid our psalms in the scent of the holy. We walked barefoot across memory. He does not ask who carved it. He leaves the next morning without a single rebuke. Quirky twist sister Aldith finds a scroll slipped beneath her mattress. It smells of bergamot and rain. The handwriting is unfamiliar. The line reads, "They heard." And they left it lit. You wonder who left it. You wonder if the bishop beneath his pomp and scowl inhaled something he chose not to name. That evening you write in Codex the Sienu. We did not outwit them. We outfragrance them. You underline it in fig ink. Lisette laughs so hard she drops a jar of basil. The garden is blooming again, but now it smells different, stronger. More voices have joined, more scrolls are being traded. Sister Emelina begins cataloging them in Secret Scented Entries Volume 1. You help her bind it in waxed linen. You realize the movement has outgrown your breath, and that's the point. You no longer scent alone. You inhale a line of lavender-salted parchment and exhale a prayer written by hands you've never touched. And you know now this gospel is airborne. The codex goes missing. Not stolen, just gone. One morning your writing desk is empty, the ink pot still warm, your quill laid gently across a folded cloth. But the codex, the original one, thick and weighted with scent, layered with memory, has vanished. Panic is not immediate. You search slowly, deliberately. Maybe you left it in the scriptorium, or the garden, or the infirmary beside the basket of drying petals, but you know you didn't. You find Lisette in the pantry inspecting dried figs. "It's gone," you whisper. She doesn't ask which it, she only nods. By nightfall, every sister knows. No words are spoken, no accusations, only quiet, deliberate searching as if one might lift a folded robe and find it nestled between the pleats, humming softly with lavender and thyme. But it is not found. Instead, something else begins to happen. Verses appear. Everywhere. Tucked into cloaks. Whispered during chores. Pressed into bread loaves. Stitched into altar cloths. Some are yours old ones passed on like relics, but others are new. And no one signs them. One verse hidden inside the cistern lid reads, "She didn't lose the gospel. She set it loose." You sit in the cloister that night, wind teasing your sleeves, and breathe deeply. The air carries bergamot rosemary ink, wax fig citrus, peel a little dust, and a lot of mystery. Historians still argue about the loss of primary sources, how some texts simply vanish from record presumed destroyed or misplaced. They mourn the absence. They call it a tragedy. But you begin to understand. The codex was never meant to be a monument. It was a match. Quirky realization. Sister Emelina walks past you at sunset with a bundle of linens. As she passes, something falls from her apron, just a slip of parchment. She pretends not to notice. You pick it up. It smells like fennel. It reads, "She gave us the scent of courage. Now we perfume the world." You sit very still, paper held lightly in your hands. You write no page that night. Instead, you gather the sisters in the garden. No candle, no singing, just breath. One by one, each sister brings a scent. A crushed herb, a petal, a sprig. You line them along the edge of the rosemary hedge like an altar built from the body of the world. And then, without ceremony, each sister places one scroll, just one, into the roots. Not buried, just offered. You place yours last. It reads, "Let the codex walk. Let it find others." The scroll smells like the first spring rain and smoke that clings to wool. Lisette takes your hand. "I think it's safer now," she says. You nod, because the truth has taken root. In sleeves, in silence. In scrolls passed beneath bread baskets and altar cloths. In kitchens and cloisters and places the church never thought to guard. The codex is gone, and now everywhere smells like story. The pilgrims arrive unannounced. Not in a wave, but a trickle, one, then two, then a cluster of 5. Mostly women, some very old one, quite young. They don't knock on the gate. They pause at the garden edge, eyes, wide noses, tilted as though following a trail only they can smell. You're in the orchard, gathering late violets for ink. One of them, wrapped in a traveling cloak patched with old embroidery, meets your gaze and smiles. "We've come," she says, "to breathe." Later in the infirmary, they unfold their treasures. Not relics. Scrolls. Cloths. Bits of worn parchment tied with threads the colors of moss, rust, and ash. One woman carries a beeswax tablet etched with poetry so faint you must warm it with your palm to read. She taught us to write in breath, so we wrote until the sky remembered our names. You make space for them. Of course you do. The abbess no longer questions. She's begun scenting her own sleeves quietly with cedar and pepper. The pilgrims stay a week. They share lines in 6 languages. A scroll that smells like nutmeg and sea salt. A fragment of cloth inked with violet root and grief. One girl has no words at all, only a jar of blue ink that smells like river water and dusk. She dips her fingers into it and touches your palm, leaving 5 blue points behind. Stars, she says. You nod. Quirky moment. Incense the chicken takes an aggressive liking to one of the travelers, pecking at her shawl until a small sachet falls out scented with marjoram and goat's milk. The woman laughs. She's got good taste. You gather the sisters and visitors one last time before their departure. No formal ritual. Just a dusk meeting in the garden now, lush and fragrant, beyond anything you imagined. Vines climb the walls. Mint carpets the path. Even the wind carries rosemary smoke orange blossom. Each visitor leaves behind one line. You write them all into a single scroll, the Breath Archive. It is too long to fit in the codex. So you stitch it into a curtain. It now hangs between the infirmary and the library, catching light and scent and silence with every step. That night you write your last line in Codex 2. You are not alone. You were never alone. You press a final pedal between the pages. Camellia for the ones who found you. Lisette joins you on the cloister bench. Do you think they'll forget, she asks. You consider this, then smile. No, because the wind remembers, and the ink won't fade from their breath. The sky turns indigo. A single bell tolls. You close the codex, and for the first time in years you sleep with nothing left unwritten. The night deepens now. You can feel it in your chest the way the silence stretches a little longer. The breath slows, the world holds still. Outside your window the rosemary shivers in a hush of wind. A candle sputters once, then steadies. The scent of parchment and clove lingers faintly in the air. You close your eyes. Somewhere far away another scroll is being written, perhaps with lavender, perhaps with sea salt and ink the color of rain, perhaps in a language you'll never read, but still you'll understand it, because the breath it carries is familiar. You've joined something invisible, gentle, and vast, a sisterhood not bound by robes or vows, but by softness, scent, and the quiet courage of expression. The codex is safe, not in your hands perhaps, but in the world, dispersed like petals on wind, like whispers stitched into robes, like time in the folds of memory. You too are safe. You've walked softly through fire. You've written where others could not speak. You've turned silence into scent. Now rest. Let the wind carry what remains. Let your shoulders release their weight. Let the breath slow and settle. The night does not judge you. It holds you gently in ink and lavender. And somewhere in the folds of sleep a scroll waits, with your name written softly in rosewater. End of script. Sweet dreams.